Hello guys, welcome to Eclipse Wizardry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Fleur and Tonks both touched Harry at age 7 and ancient magic refused to let any other woman in? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The day it happened, the summer Surrey got that particular shade of hot, the kind that made the pavement smell like old rubber and the Dursleys' garden hose run lukewarm no matter how long you let it go. Was the summer Harry Potter turned 7 and learned that the world was considerably stranger than anyone on Privet Drive was willing to admit. He'd known something was off about himself for a while, of course. Not in the way the Dursleys meant when they said it, hissing the word off like it was a smell. He meant something quieter than that. Something that lived in the space between wanting a thing and the thing happening, like the time he'd been up on the school roof without climbing there, or the time Dudley's birthday cake had gone blue for approximately 4 seconds before going back to its normal sickly yellow. Harry hadn't done those things on purpose. They had simply happened, the way breathing happens, the way you don't decide to shiver in the cold. By 7 he'd stopped being surprised by it. He'd started being careful, which was different and in some ways worse, because being careful meant watching himself constantly, and watching yourself constantly is exhausting work for a boy who would rather have been reading or looking at the sky or doing absolutely anything else. Vernon Dursley had decided that Saturday was a market day. This was not generosity. Vernon had a specific kind of meanness that dressed itself up as practicality. He needed a boy to carry bags, and Dudley had already broken 2 handles on last month's run and complained the whole way besides. Harry was therefore useful, which was the closest he usually got to wanted. The Guildford Street Market ran every other Saturday from June through August, a long open-air affair with canvas stalls and boxes of vegetables and a cheese vendor who always had flies circling his samples no matter what the health inspector said about it. Harry liked it, despite everything. There was a used book stall at the far end run by an old man named Morris who wore reading glasses on a chain and never, ever asked Harry why he was reading something too old for him. Vernon gave him 2 carrier bags and pointed him at the fruit stalls. "You'll stay where I can see you," Vernon said, which meant stay where I don't have to look at you but also don't go anywhere I'd have to explain. Don't touch anything you're not buying. Don't talk to anyone. Don't, he made a vague, encompassing gesture that seemed to mean don't be yourself in public. "Yes, Uncle Vernon," Harry said, and took the bags. The market was already thick with people by 9 in the morning. Harry worked his way along the stalls methodically, because Vernon had given him a list and the list had to be followed exactly or there would be a row about it later, and rows about the shopping were somehow more exhausting than rows about other things because they were so completely stupid. Tomatoes. Apples. The small cucumbers, not the large ones. Bread from the bakery stall, not the supermarket bread, because Petunia had developed opinions about bread crusts. He was on his way back from the bread stall, both bags moderately full, when the crowd thickened suddenly near the main thoroughfare, some kind of bottleneck around a stall selling handmade jam, of all things, and Harry got compressed into a small pocket of space between a large man with a pushchair and a woman with about 16 shopping bags who was making a sound like a kettle about to boil. He didn't fall, exactly. It was more that the large man shifted without looking and his elbow caught Harry across the shoulder and Harry staggered, his feet tangling, and the bread and the apples became briefly airborne and time did that strange thing it sometimes did, where it stretched like taffy right before something bad happened. A hand caught his arm. Not roughly, not with the automatic irritation of an adult grabbing a child out of the way, with actual deliberate care, fingers wrapping around his forearm and steadying him the way you'd steady something you didn't want to fall. Harry looked up. The girl was maybe 15 or 16, tall, with hair so pale it was nearly white catching the summer light, and eyes that were an unusual shade of grey-blue, and she was French, he could tell somehow before she even opened her mouth, not from any specific feature but from the total assembled impression of her, the way she stood, the quality of her attention. She was looking at him with a slight frown that wasn't unfriendly, more like she was working something out. "You are all right?" she said, and yes, French, the accent was light but unmistakable. "Fine," Harry said, because that was his default. Thank you. She had not let go of his arm. Not in a strange way, she was still just steadying him, making sure his feet were under him, but the contact lasted a half-second longer than it needed to, and in that half-second Harry felt something. He couldn't have described it then and would struggle to describe it later. It was warm, was the closest he'd get. Warm and very deep, like putting your hand into sun-heated water and feeling the warmth go all the way down. It pulsed once, somewhere in the center of his chest, and his scar, which he generally forgot about because it so rarely bothered him, prickled lightly, not painfully, like someone touching a bruise they didn't know was there. The girl's eyes went slightly wide. She felt it too. He could see it in the way her expression changed, the frown deepening, then clearing, replaced by something more alert, something searching. "Your apples," she said, and let go, and pointed at where 3 of them had rolled into the legs of the jam stall. Harry gathered them, and when he looked back she was gone, absorbed back into the crowd, leaving behind only the impression of pale hair and those watching eyes and the warmth in his chest that didn't go away. He stood there for a moment with 3 apples in his hands and both carrier bags in the crooks of his elbows and thought, very clearly, that was something. Then Vernon bellowed his name from 3 stalls over and Harry went. The second time happened 40 minutes later, and it came without warning, which was perhaps the universe's way of ensuring Harry didn't miss it by bracing for it. He was on his way to Morris's book stall. Vernon had disappeared into the hardware section with Dudley, who had developed a sudden enthusiasm for power tools that Harry suspected was mostly about the noise they made, which meant Harry had approximately 15 minutes of unsupervised time and intended to spend it looking at a battered hardcover copy of The Hobbit that Morris had had on the shelf for 2 months and which Harry had been trying to work up the courage to ask the price of. He was cutting through the narrow alley between the main market and the car park when the boy came out of nowhere. Not a small boy. Probably 13, maybe 14, with the specific kind of size that meant he'd hit a growth spurt and hadn't quite figured out what to do with all the new limbs yet. He had 2 friends with him, which was the more important detail, and they were looking at Harry with the lazy, predatory interest of boys who were bored and had found something smaller. "Oi," the big one said. Conversational. Almost friendly. "Those your shopping bags?" "Yes," Harry said. "Can I see?" Harry had dealt with this before. He'd dealt with it in various forms for most of his remembered life, actually, because Dudley had trained a small army of neighborhood boys to treat Harry like a sport, and Dudley himself had several years of practice at it. He knew the shape of this conversation. It went nowhere good. What he was weighing up, and he was fast at this calculation, had gotten fast at it through sheer repetition, was the distance to the main market, the size of the boy, the likelihood that the 2 friends were followers rather than initiators, and whether there was any version of this that didn't end with him losing the shopping. He was still calculating when the hand landed on his shoulder. Not grabbing. Not rough. Just, there. Firmly, warmly, right on the back of his left shoulder, the weight of it distinct and deliberate, and a voice above and behind him said, "All right, mate," in the bright, easy tone of someone who absolutely knew what they were walking into and had decided they didn't care. Harry looked back. She was young, not as young as the French girl, maybe a year older, 17 perhaps, with short hair that was currently bubblegum pink, which was striking enough that Harry's brain paused on it for a moment before processing the rest of her. She had a warm brown face, dark eyes that were doing a very specific kind of amused calculation, and she was looking past Harry at the 3 boys with an expression of relaxed, absolute confidence that was nothing like bravado. Bravado always had a thin edge of fear underneath it. This didn't. "Friend of yours," she said to Harry, and there was the subtlest emphasis on friend that made it clear she already knew the answer. "Not really," Harry said. She looked at the big boy. "You lot bored?" The big boy looked at the pink hair and the easy posture and made the specific calculation that sometimes teenage boys make, which was, she's a girl and therefore manageable. "Nothing to do with you," he said. "Well," she said pleasantly, "I'm standing here, so it sort of is." She tilted her head. "You lot go to St. Brutus's, do you?" The school down the Basingstoke Road? That was specific enough to land. The big boy's eyes flickered. How'd you know that? My cousin went there. I know all sorts of things about that school. Specifically, I know the headmaster's name and his direct phone number. She smiled. It was the most cheerful smile Harry had ever seen on someone who was also clearly prepared to be extremely inconvenient. 3 boys hassling a 7-year-old in the market car park. That's a good one to lead with, isn't it? The boys left. Not running, that would have cost them too much dignity, but they went, and the going was permanent. The pink-haired girl looked down at Harry. You're all right? I was going to be all right, Harry said, not defensively, just as a point of accuracy. She snorted. Yeah, you had the look of someone working something out. I just sped it up. She squeezed his shoulder once before taking her hand away, and there it was, the warmth again, the pulse in his chest, deeper this time, like a bell struck twice and the second strike hitting the same resonance as the first and the 2 sounds building into something bigger than either one alone. His scar prickled. The air around him felt briefly, electric wasn't quite the right word. Present. Very intensely present. The girl went very still. Her eyes dropped to his forehead, to the scar visible above the fringe of black hair that never lay flat. Her expression shifted into something complicated, recognition, and then something that looked almost like it wanted to be fear but couldn't quite get there, because underneath the recognition was something else, something Harry had no name for yet, warm in the same way the first thing had been warm, deep in the same way, like a key turning in a lock that had always been there. Oh, she said quietly. And then, more quietly, oh, that's, What? Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment. She seemed to be deciding something, or accepting something, or both. Nothing, she said, in the tone of someone who means everything but now is not the time. You live around here? Privet Drive. Right. She nodded slowly. I'm Tonks. Nymphadora Tonks, but do not call me Nymphadora, I will haunt you. Harry, he said. I know, she said, very softly, and there was something in her voice that he didn't have the context for yet, a weight, a recognition, a kind of careful tenderness that sat strangely on someone who'd been grinning 30 seconds ago. Look, Harry. This is going to sound odd, and you don't have to believe me right now, but, she stopped. Started again. You're going to be someone, yeah. In a way that matters. And it's going to be complicated, and people are going to want things from you, and, she seemed to be fighting with herself about how much of this to say. Just be careful who you trust with the complicated stuff. Not everyone who wants to protect you has your interests first. Harry looked at her steadily. He was 7, but he had been thinking carefully about the world for some years already, and he recognized the shape of a real warning when he heard one. Are you one of the ones with my interests first? She blinked. Then she laughed, a real laugh, startled out of her, bright and genuine. Yeah, she said. Yeah, I think I actually am. She looked at him one more time, at his face, at his scar, at whatever she was seeing underneath both. Go do your shopping, Harry Potter. And eat something tonight, yeah? You look like you haven't had a proper meal in a week. She walked away through the car park, pink hair catching the sun, and Harry watched her go and felt the warmth in his chest settle into something steadier, something that was going to stay. He didn't tell Vernon. He didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell, really, and even if there had been, Harry wasn't sure he had the words for it yet. Something had happened. 2 somethings, an hour apart, both with the same impossible warmth, the same prickle at his scar, the same sense of a door opening somewhere in a house he hadn't known he lived in. He thought about it that night in the cupboard under the stairs, lying on his too small cot with one arm behind his head and the dark pressing in from all sides, which was the kind of dark he was used to enough that it didn't bother him much anymore. He thought about the French girl's grey-blue eyes going wide. He thought about the pink-haired girl's voice saying oh like she just understood something. He thought about the warmth, the pulse, the scar's mild and specific prickling. He'd felt magic before, in the wordless, sourceless way it sometimes moved through him before he did something impossible. This was different. This was older. He didn't have the word ancient yet in the way he'd come to understand it, but he had the shape of it, the sense of something that predated any system or school or theory, something that had been operating by its own logic long before anyone had thought to write the logic down. Outside the cupboard door, he could hear Dudley's television going and Vernon's occasional commentary on the news and Petunia's movements in the kitchen. Normal. Ordinary. The world's most comprehensively unmagical household. Inside the cupboard, something in Harry's chest was humming like a struck tuning fork, quiet and constant and absolutely certain. He fell asleep to it, which was better than most nights. In Guildford, in a bed and breakfast that her father had declared acceptable but barely, Fleur Delacour sat on the edge of a narrow bed and stared at her own right hand. She'd been in England for 4 days. Her father, Armand, was attached to a French ministry trade delegation doing something complicated about international portkey licensing, and Fleur had come because the alternative was 2 weeks at her grandmother's house in Provence listening to her grandmother explain at length how Fleur's Vila blood was both a gift and a curse and how she must learn to manage its effects on other people. Fleur had heard this lecture approximately 40,000 times. England, even with its terrible food and inexplicable weather, was preferable. She'd gone to the market because she was bored and because there was supposed to be a good second-hand bookstall, and she'd caught the small dark-haired boy when he'd stumbled because she'd been standing right there and it was the obvious thing to do. And then she turned her hand over, palm up, looking at nothing. There was nothing to see. That was the disorienting part. Whatever had happened in a register she couldn't observe directly, only feel in retrospect, the way you feel the presence of a sound after it stopped, the shape of it left behind in the silence. She was, by her mother's side, a quarter Vila. This meant she understood something about magic that didn't live in spells and incantations, magic that was categorical rather than technical, that recognized things and responded to them. She'd spent her life in the complicated social weather of her own nature, the way men and boys responded to her, the way women sometimes resented her for how men and boys responded to her, the exhausting performance of navigating all of it. She knew what her magic felt like from the inside. She knew its texture and its temperature. What had happened in that market was not her magic. Or, not only her magic. It was something else, something that had reached up from that small thin boy like a root suddenly finding water, and met something in her, and the meeting had the feeling not of collision but of completion, which was not a sensation she had experienced before or had any framework for and which was therefore currently making her feel slightly insane. She was 16. She was very good at being 16 in the way that meant not letting anyone see when something had rattled you. She was also, underneath the composure, rattled. Her wand was on the nightstand, a 9-inch construction of rosewood and Vila hair, her grandmother's hair, technically, which felt intensely personal and also gave the wand a quality that other witches' wands lacked, a certain resonance on particularly emotional magic. She picked it up now and just held it, feeling the familiar return hum of it, grounding herself in the known. The boy had had a scar on his forehead. A lightning bolt, small and pale. She'd seen it for half a second before he'd looked away. She knew what that scar meant. Her father moved in ministry circles, French and British both. She'd grown up with the shape of you-know-who and the one who defeated him at the edges of conversations, the quiet collective exhalation of relief that characterized the British wizarding world's relationship with a war that had ended before she was a teenager. Harry Potter. The scar belonged to Harry Potter, who had just been carrying shopping bags in a market looking like he hadn't slept properly in days, and who had looked at her when she steadied him with those enormous green eyes that were somehow simultaneously too old and too young for a 7-year-old's face, and at whose touch something vast and wordless in the fabric of the world had apparently decided to rearrange itself. "Murd," Fleur said softly, to the empty room, and it felt entirely appropriate. Across Surrey, in a small flat above a chip shop in Woking that she shared with two other trainee aurors, Fleur Tonks sat on her kitchen counter eating cereal out of the box and staring at the wall. She'd been in Surrey because Dawlish had sent her, or rather, Dawlish had been sent and had taken her along as the junior attachment, because that was what junior auror trainees were for. Apparently, you got taken places like a particularly eager piece of luggage. The assignment was surveillance on a suspected Death Eater sympathizer in a village outside Guildford, the kind of low-stakes watchwork that a senior auror dealt with by sending their trainee and then going for a pint. Tonks had finished the watchwork and then wandered into town because she was hungry and bored, and because the market days in Surrey towns had a quality she liked. They reminded her of going to market with her mum when she was small, before everything got complicated, before her dad's family stopped speaking to her dad and the silence from that side became its own presence in the house. She hadn't planned to intervene with those boys. She'd seen the situation from across the car park and had made a decision in about 4 seconds, which was pretty much how all her decisions happened. Fast, instinctive, committed. Her auror supervisor said this was a liability. Tonks thought it was probably the best thing about her, personally. She had not planned for the rest of it. She set the cereal box down and looked at her shoulder, the shoulder that had been touching Harry Potter for approximately 15 seconds in a market car park while she sent 3 bored teenagers on their way. There was nothing to see. Of course there was nothing to see. Whatever had happened wasn't visible, it was felt. It was in the register of feeling rather than seeing, which was already unusual because Tonks was fundamentally a tactile, physical person and she trusted what she could see and hear and touch more than what she merely sensed. This she had sensed. This she had felt down to something that didn't have a location exactly, somewhere in the center of her that wasn't her stomach or her heart but shared territory with both. She was a metamorphmagus, which meant she understood transformation from the inside in a way most witches and wizards didn't, the sense of being mutable, of having a self that wasn't fixed to any one form, of choosing rather than inheriting. She'd always thought of it as her defining thing, the core of what made her her. The ability to be anyone while remaining always herself. What had happened with Harry Potter felt like that, but in reverse. Like something had looked at the mutable, shifting interior of her and said, "Here. Here is one of the things that doesn't change." She was 17. She'd kissed 3 boys and 1 girl and had strong opinions about Quidditch and weak opinions about most political positions, and she had never, in the complete history of her self-awareness, felt anything that resembled what she'd felt in that car park. It wasn't romantic. She needed to be clear with herself about that, even now, even alone. He was 7. Whatever this was, it wasn't that. But it was something that had the quality of a promise, or a recognition, or both, and it was going to matter, and she knew this with the bone-deep certainty that she usually only felt about things she was about to do rather than things that had already been done to her. She thought about his eyes. About the directness in them, the careful intelligence, the way he'd said I was going to be all right not as a protest but as a simple statement of fact. About the scar, thin and pale and lightning-shaped, and what it meant, and what it had cost him to have it. She thought about the warmth she'd felt. She'd been trained, even at 17, to think about the history of ancient magic, the stuff that predated the Ministry, predated Hogwarts, predated any formal structure of wizarding civilization. She knew enough to know that it operated by laws no one fully understood. She knew enough to know that when it moved with intention, even if the intention wasn't legible. She picked up the cereal box again, thought better of it, and put it back down. "All right," she said to herself, in the tone she used for decisions that were already made. "All right. Okay." So that happened. Then she went to bed, because tomorrow was a Monday and Dawlish expected her in at 7. The warmth in Harry's chest didn't fade. That was the thing. He had expected it to, expected it the way the impossible things usually dissolved back into ordinary reality, leaving him unsure whether they'd happened at all. But this one stayed. Day after day, through the rest of that summer and into the autumn and through the grinding ordinary misery of the school year and the next summer after that, the warmth was there. Quiet. steady. Like a pilot light. He thought about the two girls sometimes. Not obsessively. Harry had a practical mind, and obsession requires a certain amount of surplus mental energy that he didn't have. He was too busy surviving the present to brood much on the past. But he thought about them. The pale-haired French girl with the searching eyes. The pink-haired girl with the absolute confidence and the genuine laugh. The world around him shifted and grew as he got older, and he shifted with it. He got better at reading people. He'd always been good at it, necessity being the mother of skill, but he got better, learned to hear what wasn't being said, to see past the surface of things. He got quieter in the Dursleys' house and more fully himself outside it, at school, in the park, in Morris's book stall where he worked his way steadily through The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings and then a battered collection of Greek myths that Morris threw in free because Harry reminded him of his grandson. He got stronger in ways that had nothing to do with size. The Dursleys kept him small through systematic underfeeding and he stayed small, but there was a quality to him that wasn't small, a kind of settled certainty about himself that was unusual in a child and that occasionally made adults look at him twice. The magic around him grew too. He stopped fighting it after a while, stopped trying to suppress the small impossible things, stopped feeling guilty when they happened. The guilt had always been theirs, not his. He just borrowed it because there was nothing else available. One Tuesday in March when he was 9, a spider dropped onto his breakfast and Petunia screamed and swatted it and then screamed again when it got back up and walked away, and Harry watched this happen with a feeling that was uncomfortably close to satisfaction, and did not apologize for the feeling, and ate his toast. The warmth in his chest pulsed once, approving. He thought sometimes about what the pink-haired girl had said. Not everyone who wants to protect you has your interests first. He didn't have enough context then to know who she'd meant, but he filed it away with the certainty that it would become clear. He was patient in the way that people are patient when they have learned that rushing things doesn't change their arrival time. He was patient, and he was waiting, and the warmth was always there, and at the center of his chest, in the place where ancient magic had reached up from somewhere pre-civilizational and old as stone and buried its recognition like a seed, something was growing. He couldn't have told you what it was yet. Not at 7, not at 8, not at 9. But by 10, lying in his cupboard in the dark, listening to the Dursleys' house go quiet around him and feeling the warmth as steady as a heartbeat, he thought he was beginning to understand the shape of it. Whatever had happened in that market had not been an accident. The world did not do things by accident, not at that scale, not with that quality of intention underneath it. Two people had touched him, 1 hour apart, on the same unexceptional Saturday morning in Surrey, and the most fundamental and ancient layer of the world had said, yes. These ones. This is what this boy is owed. Not a cage. Not a contract. Something more like recognition. The world recognizing what it owed him and making a promise about it in the oldest language available. He didn't know their names yet. The French girls he'd never gotten. The pink-haired girl had given him Tonks but not much else, and he didn't have access to any directory of people with pink hair and aura training. He would find out, he thought. Things like this had a way of finding their own resolution. He was right about that, as it turned out. He was right about most things, which was going to be both useful and deeply inconvenient to a great many people over the years. The letter arrived the Tuesday after his 11th birthday, which wasn't a surprise in the way the Dursleys expected it to be a surprise. Harry had known something was coming. The warmth in his chest had been building for weeks, small and steady and anticipatory, like the feeling before a storm when the air changes quality and the birds go quiet. He'd felt it the way you feel a door about to open, not seeing it, just knowing. But that letter wasn't the only one. There were 3 owls. Vernon Dursley, who came down the stairs that morning in his bathrobe to find 3 large owls sitting on the kitchen table looking absolutely unbothered by the domestic setting, said something that was essentially just a very loud vowel sound and stepped back into the wall. Dudley hid behind him. Petunia made the face she reserved for moments when the world failed to be what she'd contracted for. Harry, who had come down last and was therefore the one the owls oriented toward, looked at the three birds and the three letters they were holding and felt the warmth in his chest surge up bright and certain, and finally he took all three letters. Vernon found his voice by the time Harry had opened the first one, the Hogwarts letter, cream-colored and heavy, Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, which was already an indication of how thoroughly Petunia and Vernon had managed to hide what their treatment of him actually constituted. "Those are," Vernon started. "Mine," Harry said, and his voice came out with a quality that surprised even him, steady and completely unimpressed, the voice of someone who has decided that he is done being surprised and done being managed and done, in particular, with this specific conversation. "They're addressed to me." Vernon looked at him. Something in Vernon's face did a complicated thing, the habitual contempt running up against something it didn't have a ready response for, some quality in Harry's posture or voice or expression that said this is not a negotiation and here is where the old rules stop applying. Harry took his letters to the cupboard, because that was still where he slept and would continue to sleep for approximately 12 more hours, as it turned out. He read the Hogwarts letter first. Standard, formal, the kind of letter that had been sent to 11-year-olds for centuries. He set it aside. He picked up the second letter. The handwriting was precise and a little formal, the parchment a faint cream color, and it was in French, but a French that translated itself to him as he read it, or maybe his understanding of it assembled itself from context and the warmth in his chest filling in the gaps, which was equally strange but felt about right for the circumstances. "Dear Harry Potter, my name is Fleur Delacour. You will not remember me. We met briefly in a market in Surrey 4 years ago, when I caught you from stumbling. You were 7. I was 16. I am writing now because I have felt, for 4 years, a connection I do not have proper words for in any language I speak, and I speak for. I am told by my mother, who knows more of the old magics than most practitioners in France, that what I am describing is a form of soul bind. Ancient. Pre-institutional. The kind of magic that predates any school or ministry and does not particularly care about their opinions. I am 20 now and enrolled at Beauxbatons, in my final year. I should tell you that I have not told many people about this, because the people I might have told are exactly the type of people who would want to manage it, and I refuse to be managed. I imagine you are receiving a Hogwarts letter at roughly the same time as this one. I imagine you are also receiving a letter from someone with very pink hair. My owl's name is Seve. She will wait for a response if you have one. Fleur Delacour. Harry read it twice. Then he put it down and picked up the third letter. This one's handwriting was entirely different, quick, slightly chaotic, the letters leaning hard to the right like they were in a hurry. "Harry, okay, so I know this is a lot to get in the morning, but here's the quick version. I'm Tonks. We met 4 years ago in a market car park in Surrey when some bigger kids were giving you grief. Pink hair. You probably remember. I'm a qualified auror now, just qualified, still getting used to calling myself that without laughing. I've felt the binding since the day it happened, I've done the research, I know what it is, and I want you to know 2 things. 1, it doesn't control you or me or anyone. It's not a compulsion or a contract. It's a recognition. Ancient magic recognizing something about you, and something about the two of us, and connecting them. You didn't ask for it. Neither did we. But here we are. 2, neither of us is going to try to manage you. I know you're 11 and we're adults and the power difference in that is already weird, and I'm telling you up front that we know that and we're not going to use it. You're a person. We're going to treat you like one. Fleur's owl is probably faster than mine is frankly ridiculous, do not be put off if he takes 4 days, but when you're ready to actually talk, send word. I'll come to you. Tonks. P.S. Eat something. I bet you still look like you haven't had a proper meal in a week. Don't let the Dursleys starve you into Hogwarts. Harry sat for a long time in the cupboard, the 3 letters spread across his knees, the warmth in his chest doing something that wasn't quite singing but was that adjacent. He was 11. He was small and underfed and living in a cupboard, and he was about to go to a school that would teach him how to do properly what he'd been doing accidentally for 4 years. And he was not, it turned out, entirely alone with the strange warm thing at the center of himself. He thought about writing back. He thought about all the things he'd want to say, the questions he'd been sitting on for 4 years, the things he'd noticed, the way the warmth had changed and grown over time. He thought about Fleur's precise and formal French and Tonks's quick cheerful chaos, and the fact that both letters, in entirely different voices, had said the same essential thing: we know. We see you. We're not going to misuse this. He picked up the quill he kept on the shelf above his cot. He'd found it at a car boot sale, had known instinctively it was the right kind of quill even before he'd known what it was right for, and he pulled one of the loose sheets of paper he used for school homework, and he wrote a response. He wrote it to both of them, which felt right: 2 letters, same words, the same truth offered in both directions. I remember you both. I've been feeling it too. For 4 years. I didn't know what it was, but I knew what it wasn't, which was an accident. I have a lot of questions. I think most of them are going to take time to answer properly, and I'm okay with that. I'm good at waiting. I'll be at Hogwarts in September. Harry. He sent Seve back with Fleur's letter and waited 3 days for Tonks's owl, who arrived looking extremely pleased with itself for what appeared to be no particular reason, and sent both responses off within an hour. Then he put the Hogwarts letter on top of the pile, walked out of the cupboard, and told Vernon Dursley that he'd be requiring a few things from the shopping list attached, and that if Vernon chose not to provide them, Harry would be writing to the school, the magical school, Vernon, the one with the owls, and explaining that his guardians were proving uncooperative, which seemed like exactly the kind of thing a magical school would have opinions about. Vernon Dursley looked at him for a long moment, and whatever he saw in Harry's face, in the steadiness of it, the complete absence of the usual anxious appeasement, the quiet certainty of a boy who has just received 3 letters on the same morning and emerged from his cupboard different in no visible way and entirely different in every way that mattered, made him decide, for once in his considerable life, to simply comply. "Fine," Vernon said. "Thank you," Harry said politely, and went to have breakfast. The warmth in his chest was steady and deep, and the door to the house he hadn't known he lived in was fully, permanently open. Chapter 2: The Boy Who Wasn't What They Expected. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was on it 40 minutes early. Not because he was anxious. Because he'd learned from a very young age that being early meant choosing where you stood rather than being placed somewhere, and he preferred choosing. The Dursleys had dropped him at King's Cross with the specific efficiency of people completing an obligation: no lingering, no goodbye beyond Vernon's grunt and Petunia's tight-mouthed silence, and Harry had found the barrier to platform 9 3/4 with almost no difficulty because Tonks had written him a detailed set of instructions in July that included the note: "Walk through it like you already know it's there. Confidence is the whole trick, hesitation is what gets people noticed doing something impossible." He'd walked through at a steady pace and emerged onto the steam-thick platform with his trunk on a trolley and Hedwig's cage on top, and he'd stood there for a moment just taking it in. The platform was already filling up. Families everywhere, the complicated social ecology of the wizarding world on full display, old names greeting each other, younger siblings running, owls making their feelings about the noise loudly known. Harry watched it all with the detached interest he brought to most new environments, cataloging without committing. He found an empty compartment near the middle of the train, loaded his trunk, settled Hedwig's cage on the rack with the window angled so she'd have air, and sat down with a book. He'd gotten through most of what Tonks and Fleur had sent him over the summer, a small stack of texts, nothing from the official Hogwarts list, things they'd chosen themselves. Fleur had sent a slim volume on magical theory that was in French but had helpfully annotated itself in the margins in English, which Harry suspected was her doing rather than the book's. Tonks had sent a more chaotic selection, a history of Auror training, a book about magical creatures that had clearly been read several times and had notes in 3 different inks in the margins, and a small pamphlet titled What Every Muggle-Raised Witch or Wizard Needs to Know That Nobody Tells Them, which had turned out to be the most practically useful thing anyone had ever given him. He was deep into the magical theory text when the compartment door slid open and a round-faced boy looked in with the general air of someone who had lost something and was checking everywhere twice. "Have you seen a toad?" the boy said. "He keeps getting away." "Not in here," Harry said. The boy's face did the particular collapse of someone who had been hoping for better news. "He'll turn up by the time we reach Scotland probably," Harry said, because the boy looked genuinely distressed and that seemed like the useful thing to say. "Toads are pretty good at existing." "What's his name?" "Trevor." The boy's expression suggested he felt this name was the least of Trevor's problems. "I'm Neville. Neville Longbottom. Harry Potter." Neville sat down, apparently having decided that toad searching could continue later. He had the kind of face that would have been described as unremarkable if not for the quality of attention in his eyes, something careful and observant that didn't match the general impression of anxious vagueness. Harry noticed this and filed it. "You're really Harry Potter?" Neville said. "As far as I know," Harry said. "Sorry, I've just heard a lot about you." "My gran talks about," Neville caught himself, seemed to decide that explaining what his grandmother talked about was potentially a minefield. "She has opinions," he said instead. "About the war and people in it." "What do you think?" Harry said. Neville blinked. "Sorry? You've heard a lot about me. What do you think?" It was clearly not a question Neville had expected, and it clearly required actual thought rather than a reflexive answer, and Harry waited while Neville thought about it with visible effort. "I think," Neville said slowly, "that being famous for something that happened when you were one is probably quite strange. And I think," he looked at Harry's face carefully, "you seem like a normal person, which is either reassuring or means I was expecting something stupid." Harry smiled. "Probably both." He turned the magical theory text face down on the seat beside him. "Sit down properly, Trevor's not going anywhere he can't come back from." By the time the train was moving, Neville had been joined by a girl who'd arrived at the compartment door like a small force of weather, brown hair, quick eyes, a copy of Hogwarts, a history under her arm and the look of someone who had opinions about most things and had already organized them. Her name was Hermione Granger, she was Muggle-born, she'd read every book on the list twice, and she was, Harry thought within about 4 minutes, exactly the kind of person who would either become his best friend or become comprehensively exhausting, and possibly both simultaneously. "Have you memorized the spell list?" she asked him, having established that he was Harry Potter and paused for about 1.5 seconds to process this information before moving on. "No," Harry said. "Have you?" "Yes." She said it without smugness, which was the thing that kept it from being annoying. She'd memorized it because she genuinely wanted to know the information, not to have memorized it. "I've also read ahead into second-year charms, because the foundational theory is really important to get right or it affects everything after." "What did you find?" Harry said. She looked at him like she'd expected him to say something dismissive and had prepared a response for it and now needed to recalibrate. Then she told him, in organized and genuinely interesting detail, about the theory of wand direction and the relationship between intent and outcome in charms casting. Harry asked questions. Neville listened with the expression of someone who is both keeping up and surprised to be keeping up. It was, Harry thought, a good start. They reached Hogwarts in the dark, which was the right way to arrive somewhere like that, the castle visible across the black water of the lake, torchlit windows burning gold against the blue-black sky, the whole thing impossibly large and impossibly real in the way that things you've imagined often aren't when you actually see them. Harry looked at it from the bow of a boat with Neville beside him and felt something that wasn't quite awe because awe has a quality of being overwhelmed, and he wasn't overwhelmed, he was simply recognizing something he'd been moving toward for a long time. The sorting was efficient and strange. Harry sat under the hat and felt it press against his thoughts with the quality of very old intelligence, something that had been sorting 11-year-olds for centuries and had developed strong opinions about the enterprise. "Interesting," the hat said, inside his head where only he could hear it. "I've been told that before," Harry said back. He'd suspected it was a sentient object and had prepared for the conversation. A pause that felt almost like the hat was pleased. Most of them just sit here waiting. You're talking back. Seemed rude not to. Gryffindor would have you easily. That's the default for your kind of courage. But you're not default, are you? I don't know what I am yet, Harry said, which was honest. I know some of it. I'm still working on the rest. The hat made a sound like an old person settling into a chair. Curiosity and intellectual rigor like a Ravenclaw. Loyalty like Hufflepuff. Courage and nerve like Gryffindor. No ambition worth calling Slytherin, which is its own kind of interesting in someone with your potential. Another pause. There's something else. Something older than any of the four houses. I can feel it. I know, Harry said. You know what it is? I know the shape of it, Harry said. I'm still learning the name. The hat seemed to sit with this. You'll need the loyalty more than the ambition and the curiosity more than the prestige. But in the end it's the nerve that's going to matter. Almost with a tone of having made a decision that was overdue, Gryffindor. The table erupted. Harry pulled the hat off his head, put it back on the stool, and walked to the Gryffindor table with the same steady pace he'd used walking through the barrier that morning. He caught a flash of red hair across the table, twins, identically grinning, already starting to say something. He caught the round surprised face of a first-year Percy who was clearly senior enough to feel opinions about new arrivals. He sat down and the noise washed over him and he was fine, he was exactly fine, he was where he was supposed to be. The owl started coming the third morning. He'd told Fleur and Tonks the date his letters would arrive, they'd timed it, the three of them, in a series of letters over the summer, so that a response from him after the sorting would reach them by Thursday morning at the latest. He'd sent Hedwig off on Tuesday night with a brief note, Gryffindor. Good hat. Good castle. Found one person who seems like a real friend, possibly two. More soon. Thursday morning, two owls arrived at breakfast almost simultaneously, Seve dropping Fleur's letter precisely in front of his plate, Tonks's owl landing with somewhat less precision and knocking over Ron Weasley's pumpkin juice, for which the owl looked completely unrepentant. Harry became aware, as he opened the letters, of the number of people watching him. Not just his house, the whole great hall had a particular quality of attention, the specific social weather of a school where Harry Potter was a legendary figure who had just arrived in the flesh and was now receiving personal owl post on his third morning. He ignored it. He'd been watched his whole life and had gotten very good at ignoring it. Ron, who had ended up at Harry's left by a process of simple proximity at the sorting and had remained there since with the cheerful persistence of someone who has decided on a friendship and is not revisiting the decision, looked at the two letters with the transparent interest of a boy who has grown up in a house with 6 siblings and therefore has essentially no social filter. Who's writing to you? Friends, Harry said. You knew wizarding folk before Hogwarts? No. I met them before I knew I was a wizard. He looked up at the hall's reaction to his post with the same calm he brought to most things. They knew. Ron processed this. And they didn't tell you? They told me what they could, Harry said, which was accurate. Tonks had told him what she could on the day they'd met, and Fleur's letter had been the first real explanation. The rest I figured out. Hermione, on his right, was watching the letters with the expression she used when something didn't fit into her existing model of the world and needed to be integrated. Harry could almost see the sorting process happening in real time. He read Fleur's letter first. It was, characteristically, precise and warm in the way that very precise things sometimes are when the precision is in service of actually saying what you mean. Harry, Gryffindor. Yes. That makes sense. I've been thinking about you as a Gryffindor for 4 years without knowing why. I am in my final year at Beauxbatons. Headmistress Maxime has announced that we will be attending the Triwizard Tournament at Hogwarts next year. It hasn't been officially announced yet, so keep this to yourself. I don't know yet whether I will compete. I know I want to see Hogwarts. I know I want to see you, though saying that out loud is still somewhat strange for me. 4 years is a long time to feel something without being able to properly look at its source. Write when you can. Tell me what the castle is like. Fleur Tonks's letter. Gryffindor. Yes, I knew it. I told Kingsley I knew it, and he bet me a galleon on Ravenclaw, and I told him about the market, and he said that doesn't narrow it down, and I said I think it does. Okay, I'm calm. I'm completely calm. How's the food? How are the teachers? Has Snape been terrible yet? He was terrible when I was there. Legendary terrible, like if being condescending were an Olympic sport terrible. Don't let him get in your head. His entire method is rattling people into making mistakes and then using the mistake as proof that you were always going to make it. It's circular and it's stupid. I'm on a case that I can't tell you about yet, but it's interesting and it's going to matter, and I'll tell you when I can. Also, the binding. I've been reading more about it. Old texts, the kind the Ministry's library has in the restricted section that I can now access because of the Auror badge, which is genuinely the best thing about having the Auror badge. I'll write more when I have something definite. But Harry, it's not something to be afraid of. I want you to know that. Tonks P.S. His name is Hermes. Don't let him pretend he's more dignified than he is. He ate someone's post on the way to you, I can tell. Harry folded both letters and tucked them into his robe pocket. Hermes, Tonks's owl, round and self-important, ruffled his feathers and accepted a piece of Harry's toast with the air of someone accepting an inadequate tribute. Are they? Ron started, then stopped, then started again with the specific energy of someone who has decided to just ask the thing. Are they girls? Yes, Harry said. Ron's freckled face did something complicated. He was 11, and the concept of girls writing personal letters to boys was still in the theoretical territory for him. Oh, he said. It's not like that, Harry said, and then, because that was both true and insufficient, or, it's not like anything I have words for yet. It's a specific thing that happened when I was 7. I'm still working out the vocabulary. This explanation was not less complicated, but Ron had the quality that Harry was already coming to recognize as one of his best features. He could accept that a thing was true even when he didn't fully understand it, and move on without needing the full explanation first. Right, Ron said, and reached for the toast. Hermione, on the other hand, was now looking at Harry with an expression that meant she had approximately 14 questions and was deciding which one to ask first. How did you meet them? You were raised by Muggles. Long story, Harry said. I'll tell you eventually. I'm holding you to that, she said, but she said it already reaching for her orange juice, already moving on, and Harry thought, yes. These are the right people to have stumbled into. The first weeks of Hogwarts had a quality that Harry could only describe as discovery with friction. The discovery was genuine, every subject was interesting in a different way, even the ones he'd been warned about, and the castle itself was a constant revelation, staircases that moved, portraits that gossiped, the grounds that shifted mood with the weather in a way that felt almost deliberate. The friction was equally genuine and came in 2 forms. The first was Draco Malfoy, who had decided on some basis Harry couldn't fully determine that Harry represented something that required management. Their first exchange had happened on the train, a compartment visit that Harry had received with polite blankness and ended by simply not accepting whatever was being offered, and Malfoy had clearly found this response insufficient, because he kept returning to the subject of Harry's choices, Harry's friends, Harry's apparent failure to be what Malfoy had expected. You'd know things better, Malfoy said one morning in the corridor outside Potions, not for the first time, if you'd chosen differently. Certain people, Malfoy, Harry said, not stopping walking, if you're going to finish that sentence with something about bloodlines, do yourself a favor and don't. Malfoy's expression flickered, surprise displacing the cultivated drawl for a moment. I wasn't going to say, you were, Harry said pleasantly. You've been about to say it for 2 weeks. The thing is, I've heard different versions of that speech my whole life from my Muggle relatives. about how the right people and the right blood and the right family make all the difference, and you want to know what I think about it?" He stopped now, because this was worth saying to Malfoy's face rather than over his shoulder, and looked at him directly, at the particular combination of entitlement and something much less certain underneath it. "I think it's what people say when they're scared they're not enough on their own merits. Which is a perfectly human thing to be scared of, by the way. But it's not my job to make that fear comfortable." He kept walking. Behind him, Malfoy said nothing for a full 5 seconds, which Harry counted. The second form of friction was Snape, exactly as advertised. Their first potions lesson had the quality of a test that Snape had designed and Harry was supposed to fail: the rapid-fire questions, the contempt layered into each pause, the specific social pressure of a teacher who has decided to demonstrate authority by selecting a target and dismantling them in front of witnesses. Harry had answered every question. Not perfectly, he genuinely didn't know about Bezoars yet, but he'd answered the ones he knew with the same quality of voice he used for everything, the steady unfussed certainty that had been developing in him since the market in Surrey, and when he didn't know something he said so without apology, and when Snape used his ignorance as an occasion for contempt Harry simply looked at him and waited for the contempt to finish and said, "Right. I'll make sure I know that by next week." He could feel Snape recalibrating. He wasn't smug about it, but he noticed it. "Nicely done," Ron whispered at his elbow after class, and Hermione, on his other side, said, "You should have known about Bezoars," in a tone that was technically a criticism but also contained a layer of satisfaction about Harry's performance that she'd probably not intended to transmit. "Tell me about Bezoars," Harry said to her. She told him about Bezoars for the next 15 minutes and he listened to all of it. November arrived with cold and Quidditch trials, and Harry made the team in the way that sometimes happened to him, not through effort or planning but through being in the right place when something was required of him. Madame Hooch's horrified shout. Neville's remembrance spiraling toward the stone courtyard. Harry on a broom for the first time in his life and already somehow knowing what to do, the instinct arriving fully formed, his hand closing around the glass ball with a certainty that had nothing to do with training. Oliver Wood found him before dinner with the intensity of someone who had been waiting for this his entire Quidditch career. "You're a natural," Wood said, with the reverence of a priest describing a miracle. "Youngest house player in a century. Seeker." "I've never played Quidditch," Harry said. "Doesn't matter." Wood waved this detail away. "I'll teach you everything you need to know. Training starts Saturday." Hermione, when Harry told her, said, "You could have been expelled." But she also said it in the same tone she'd used about the Bezoars, official disapproval with unofficial approval underneath it. "I didn't fall," Harry pointed out. "You didn't know you weren't going to fall." "I did, actually," Harry said, which was true, and which he hadn't quite understood until he said it. He'd known. In the same way he knew most things that mattered, not intellectually, not through reasoning, but from somewhere deeper, the same source as the warmth in his chest and the magic that had always moved through him like something that belonged there. Neville, who had been sitting in the corner of the common room nursing a bruised wrist from an unrelated incident with a devil's snare in herbology, said quietly, "I'm glad you caught it." He held up the remembrall. "It's Gran's. She'd have been very sorry about it." "Then I'm glad too," Harry said. He was writing to Fleur about the Quidditch development. She had views on Quidditch, specifically that the Beauxbatons girls had a league that nobody took seriously and should take seriously, and she'd been asking him for updates on the Hogwarts game, when Ron came into the dorm with the news that Hermione had been crying in the girls' bathroom all day because of something that had been said in the corridor. Harry put the letter down immediately. He already knew Ron felt bad about it. Ron's voice had the specific guilty quality of someone who knows they're about to suggest doing the right thing partly because they want to stop feeling bad about the wrong thing, which Harry had also heard before. The thing about Ron was that even when his motivation was mixed, the instinct to fix it was real, and real was enough. "Troll," Harry said, which wasn't a non sequitur. There had been an announcement about a troll in the dungeons that night, and everyone had been sent to their dormitories, and Hermione hadn't been in the corridor coming back from dinner. They went. The troll was large and comprehensively stupid in the way that made it dangerous rather than manageable. It had cornered Hermione in the bathroom in the way that large stupid things corner smaller things, through the logic of being enormous in a small space, and Harry arrived at the door 2 seconds ahead of Ron and had his wand out before he'd fully processed the scene. The charm he used was technically second year. He'd read ahead. He'd been reading ahead all term, not to show off but because the information was available and interesting and he believed in knowing what he was working with. The wand went up, the charm hit, the troll's own club reversed direction and connected with the troll's head with a sound like a stone dropped on a stone, and then there was a lot of sudden silence where the troll's movements had been. Hermione was pressed against the sink, very white, very still. Ron was in the doorway looking between the troll and Harry with an expression of pure startled awe. "You're all right?" Harry said to Hermione. She looked at him, then at the troll, then at his wand. "What spell was that?" "Locomotor mortis variant," Harry said. "I modified it. You can apply it to carried objects." Her eyes went sharper, the academic interest cutting through the shock in a way that said a great deal about her essential nature. "That's not in the textbook." "No," Harry said. "I read other things too." The teachers arrived at that point, McGonagall in full fury, Quirrell in a faint, Snape in the doorway with an unreadable expression and eyes that moved over Harry with an attention Harry was beginning to recognize as something other than contempt. Something more like reassessment. McGonagall's fury, directed at the two of them, had the quality of a storm that had to break somewhere. Harry let it break. He didn't apologize exactly, he said they'd come to find Hermione and the troll had been there, which was the simple truth, and he said it in the voice that declined to perform remorse he didn't feel. Hermione, surprising both boys and possibly surprising herself, spoke up. She'd been there because she'd gone looking, she said. It was her fault they were there. It was generous and only half true and they all knew it. McGonagall gave Hermione a pointed look and Harry 5 points for quick spell work and then sent them all to bed, and in the corridor afterward the three of them walked back to Gryffindor Tower in a silence that had the quality of something settling, a thing that had been potential becoming actual. Friends. Real ones, the kind you go into a bathroom with a troll for. Harry had thought he'd found that on the train. Now he was sure. December came and the castle filled with the compressed festive energy of 800 young people who were about to go home for 2 weeks, and then gradually emptied as most of them did exactly that. Harry stayed. The Dursleys hadn't wanted him back and he hadn't argued, and staying meant the castle mostly to himself and the long quiet library hours and Christmas morning with Ron, whose whole family had gone to Romania to visit his brother Charlie but who'd stayed back on ostensible grounds of keeping Harry company, which Harry understood was also about something quieter. The burrow being very full and Ron sometimes needing the space that large loving families don't always leave room for. There were presents on Christmas morning, which Harry had not expected and therefore which hit him harder than he showed. Weasley jumper, deep green, from Ron's mother who had never met him. Sweets. A book on advanced seeker techniques from Hermione, who had gone home with the note, "In case you're serious about this." A small package from Tonks, a battered paperback on magical history that had notes in all 3 of her different inks and a scrawled page inside the cover, "Happy Christmas, Harry. You're doing brilliantly. T." A slim, elegant envelope from Fleur containing a card in French and English both, and a flat rectangular package that turned out to be a photograph, a wizarding photograph, moving, of the Beauxbatons grounds in snow, pale and beautiful, with the note, "So you know what beauty can look like when it isn't performing itself." He sat for a long time with that photograph. The last gift had no label, no note, nothing but wrapping and inside it an invisibility cloak, smooth and cold as water, with a small card tucked into the folds. Use it well. He knew, in the abstract, that the cloak had probably once belonged to his father. He knew that the handwriting on the card looked like it had been chosen to be untraceable, which meant someone had gone to deliberate effort to give him this without claiming the giving. He made a note of this and filed it carefully, in the part of his mind where he kept things that were important and not yet complete. He used the cloak that night to go to the library, and found the mirror of Ariste, and stood in front of it and saw his parents, his mother's eyes, his father's hair, the assembled faces of a family that had been stolen, and then he looked past the image, at the glass itself, at the quality of the mirror's magic, and understood what it was doing and chose not to stay. Not because looking didn't hurt. It hurt considerably. But there was a difference between pain that teaches you something and pain that loops back into itself, and the mirror only offered the second kind. He told Dumbledore about it the following day. Not everything, he'd decided years ago, on the basis of Tonks's first and most useful piece of advice, to be selective about what he gave Dumbledore, but enough to open the conversation, to see what Dumbledore would do with honesty. Dumbledore told him about the mirror, explained it. Then he told Harry not to go back. "I understand why," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him over the half-moon glasses. "You do?" "It shows a complete thing," Harry said. "But completion isn't real. Things only look complete from the outside or in retrospect. From the inside, things are always in progress." He paused. "I don't want a static image of what I want. I want the actual thing, whatever that turns out to be." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. It was a different kind of quiet than most adults used around Harry, not dismissive, not patronizing, genuinely still. "You are not what I expected, Harry," he said eventually. "I know," Harry said. "I expect you'll find that useful sometimes and inconvenient others." The faintest suggestion of a smile at the edge of the old man's mouth. "Quite." Harry went back to the dormitory, wrote letters to Tonks and Fleur, and slept better than he had in months. The end of the year came in a rush, the stone, Quirrell, the room with the mirror and the encounter that left Harry's hand burning and Quirrell's face crumbling, and Voldemort's voice sliding out of the destruction like smoke through a gap. "We will meet again, Harry Potter." Yes, Harry had said, to the smoke, to the absence, with none of the fear in his voice that had been expected. "We probably will." He was 11. He'd just come face to face with the most feared dark wizard of the century, and he was standing in the middle of a ruined room with his hand aching and his heart beating hard, and his magic was singing, actually, the way it sometimes did when he'd done something necessary and true, the warmth in his chest burning bright and certain. He'd won tonight. Not permanently. Not finally. But tonight, here, now. Dumbledore had found him 20 minutes later, and in his eyes there had been that complex thing again, the pride and the calculation running alongside each other, the old man already moving pieces on a board in his head, already thinking 3 moves ahead. Harry had looked back at him and thought, yes. "And I see you doing it." He didn't say it. Not yet. He filed it. The year-end feast was noise and light and the specific warm chaos of Gryffindor winning the House Cup by a margin that involved last-minute point additions for Harry and Ron and Hermione and Neville's face when his name was called was one of the best things Harry had ever seen, all the surprised, genuine, unguarded joy of someone who had not expected to matter and has just been shown that they do. On the train home, Harry sat with Ron and Hermione and Neville and felt the year settle around him like something that had found its shape. First year. Done. Real friendships, real magic, real understanding of what he was capable of and what he was not yet capable of, and the territory between. He had letters to write when he got back. He had a lot to tell Tonks and Fleur. He looked out the window at the countryside moving past, and the warmth in his chest was the steadiest it had ever been, 4 years of quiet accumulation and 1 year of genuine discovery, and underneath both, the ancient deep thing that had started in a market in Surrey on a hot Saturday morning, burning like a compass needle pointing somewhere true. He wasn't the boy the wizarding world had expected. He'd known that since the hat's voice in his head said interesting and meant it. He'd known it since Dumbledore's eyes had done their complicated thing. He'd known it since Fleur's letter had said I refuse to be managed like it was a manifesto, and Tonks's had said you're a person like it was a reminder he needed. He was something else. Something that was still becoming itself, still in the process of growth that he'd described to the hat, not default, not finished, not afraid. He was 11 going on 12, and he was exactly what he was supposed to be, and the world was going to find that considerably more interesting than it had planned for. Chapter 3, 3 Names on the Goblet. The Goblet of Fire spat Harry's name out at 8:17 on a Thursday evening in October, and the entire great hall went so quiet that you could hear the flame. Harry had been sitting between Ron and Hermione when it happened, third time watching the goblet work, already having seen Cedric Diggory's name emerge for Hogwarts, Victor Crumbs for Durmstrang, Fleur Delacour's for Beauxbatons. He'd kept his face very still when Fleur's name came out. He'd felt the warmth surge in his chest, a recognition, a response to her presence that he was accustomed to by now but which still had the quality of a tuning fork struck hard. Fleur was here. Fleur had been here since the delegations arrived 2 days ago, and he'd seen her across the entrance hall and she'd seen him, and they'd both done the specific thing of deciding that the conversation would keep, that there was time, that they didn't need to perform the reunion for an audience. There had been time. Right up until the moment the goblet produced a fourth name that shouldn't have existed. The parchment drifted into Dumbledore's hand and he read it once, quietly, and then read it aloud. Harry Potter. The silence. Harry stood up because sitting seemed like the wrong response to your name being read in front of 900 people, and he was aware of every eye in the hall, and he was aware of Ron's sharp intake of breath on his left and Hermione's hand catching his sleeve for half a second before she released it. And he walked toward the front of the hall in the same steady pace he used for everything, because the alternative was to let the thousand-eyed attention of the room dictate his speed, and he had never done that and wasn't starting now. Dumbledore met his eyes as he passed. The old man's expression was composed and searching and contained, under the composure, something Harry had learned to identify over 3 years of careful observation, the look of a chess player whose board has developed an unexpected configuration. Harry held the look for a moment, even, neutral, and kept walking. The champion's antechamber was a low-ceilinged stone room with a fire and 4 chairs, 3 of which were occupied. Cedric Diggory, 17, broad-shouldered, with the easy confidence of someone used to being good at things. Victor Crumb, 18, dark-browed and watchful in a way that Harry respected immediately. And Fleur Delacour. Fleur looked at him when he walked in and something crossed her face that was too quick and too complicated to fully read: surprise, recognition, the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for something and is now recalibrating because it's arrived differently than expected. She was 17 months older than when he'd last seen her properly, in their correspondence over the summer, and he was 14, he was not oblivious, strikingly beautiful, but that had always been the least interesting thing about her. And what he saw when he looked at her was the watchfulness, the quality of attention, the particular way she held herself that said, I know exactly what people expect from me and I have decided not to provide it. Harry, she said, and her voice was quiet under the general noise of the other champions reacting to his entrance. Fleur, he said. Cedric looked between them. Crumb watched Harry with the assessing look of someone who is used to being assessed himself. The adults arrived in a flood: Dumbledore, Maxime, Karkaroff, Bagman, Crouch, and the room filled with competing voices all doing different things with their authority, and Harry stood in the middle of it and let it happen, watching. Karkaroff was angry in a performative way that was probably covering something more complicated. Maxime was furious in a more genuine way, defending Fleur's selection and Beauxbatons' honor. Bagman was excited with the desperate energy of someone who needed this to go well. Crouch was clipped, efficient, already managing the situation toward a predetermined conclusion. Dumbledore, notably, was watching Harry more than he was managing the conversation. I didn't put my name in, Harry said, into a gap in the adult noise. The room looked at him. I know, Dumbledore said, carefully. We believe that. Then the question is who did, Harry said. And why? Karkaroff started saying something about the age line, about how a 14-year-old couldn't have. Harry tuned it out because Karkaroff was performing rather than reasoning, and performers were only useful for what they revealed by accident. Crouch said something about magical contracts, about champions being bound once selected. Harry noted this. So I'm competing, Harry said. Not a question. The goblet constitutes a binding magical contract, Crouch said, clipped. A champion who refuses to compete risks. There are consequences to breaking. I'm not refusing, Harry said. I'm establishing the facts. He looked at Dumbledore. I'm competing because there's no safe alternative, not because I want to. Those are different things. Dumbledore's eyes did their complicated thing. They are, he agreed. I'll want to talk to you properly, Harry said to him, meaning, this conversation between the two of us is not finished and has not been finished for some time. Dumbledore heard the subtext, Harry could see him hear it, and nodded once. They were dismissed. The champions filed out first, and in the corridor outside the antechamber, while Cedric and Crumb moved toward their respective delegation groups, Fleur fell into step beside Harry without discussion, as though this were the natural order of things, which in some ways it was. Someone put your name in the goblet, she said, her voice low. Yes. To force you into the tournament. To force me into something, Harry said. The tournament's the mechanism. It's not the point. She looked at him sideways, and he could see her processing it, the quick, organized intelligence that her letters had always demonstrated, sorting the information. It is a trap, she said. Not a question either. Almost certainly. Then we should prepare for the possibility that the trap is not only the tournament's tasks. Yes, Harry said. He felt the warmth in his chest, steady and sure, and for the first time since his name had come out of the goblet, the taut feeling in his shoulders eased a fraction. Not because the problem was solved. Because he was not solving it alone. Come and find me tomorrow morning. Before breakfast if you can. I want to think this through properly. She nodded. Then she said, quietly, as she turned toward the Beauxbatons carriages, I have thought about this moment, seeing you again, for 3 years. I had imagined it differently. Less dramatic, Harry said. Her mouth curved. Considerably less dramatic. A pause. Although I am beginning to think that drama is simply what your life looks like, Harry Potter. I'm working on changing that, he said. I doubt you'll succeed, she said, and the smile was fully there now, warm and precise, and she walked away through the castle's torchlit dark toward the Beauxbatons carriages. He found Tonks the next morning before he found anyone else. She was sitting on a bench outside the entrance hall in full auror gear, which meant the ministry had posted her here as part of the tournament security detail, which he'd suspected was coming. She'd written in September to say she was being assigned to Hogwarts for the year, that she'd pulled strings she didn't technically have yet to pull because she wasn't leaving him in a compromised environment without someone she trusted at his back. She looked up when he came out the doors and her face did the thing it always did when she saw him, the quick bright warmth that she didn't bother to hide because Tonks had never in her life bothered to hide anything she felt. She was 21 now, sharp and lean and competent in a way that had weight to it, the easygoing chaos of her still present but operating now as a layer over something more solid. Morning, she said. Morning. He sat on the bench beside her. You heard. I heard. Her voice was even, but her jaw was set. I've also been doing the maths on how someone got a fourth name into a goblet that had a certified age line on it, and I don't love the answers I'm getting. Confounded, Harry said. Something powerful enough to trick the goblet into thinking there were 4 schools competing. Meaning whoever did this had access and time and considerable skill. Which narrows it but not enough. Moody, Harry said. Tonks went still. That's a significant accusation. I know. I said it because I think it, not because I'm certain. He'd been turning it over since last night, the new Dada teacher, the paranoid eye, the constant wariness that had the quality of either genuine vigilance or very convincing performance. Something's off about him. I don't know what yet. Tonks looked at him for a long moment. I'll look into it quietly. Don't say this to Dumbledore yet. I wasn't going to. She gave him a sideways look that contained several years of correspondence compressed into an expression. No, I didn't think you were. Then, more gently, "You okay?" "Working on it," Harry said. "My name came out of the goblet in front of 900 people and I'm apparently competing in something that was probably designed to kill me, and I'm 14, so, I'm fine, but I'm also aware that fine is doing a lot of work." Tonks laughed. Short, real, the kind she only let out when something actually got through. "Yeah. That sounds about right." She bumped his shoulder with hers. "Fleur's here." "I know. I spoke to her last night." "How was that?" "Good," Harry said. "It was, good." He was quiet for a moment. "It's strange, isn't it? We've been writing for 3 years and I've felt this connection my whole life, and actually standing next to her is just," he stopped. "Different," Tonks offered. "Easier," he said. "Which is the strange part. I expected it to be more complicated. But it was just easy. Like a conversation that started a long time ago picking back up." Tonks was quiet. He glanced at her and caught the expression she wore when she was being careful with something she was feeling, which was not her natural mode and therefore was always visible. "And us?" he said. She looked at him directly, which Tonks almost always did. "We're all so easy," she said. "Just, different easy." A pause. "I've thought about it a lot. What this binding is, what it means when you're older, what it means now while you're not. I'm not going to pretend there isn't," she made a gesture that covered the complicated territory. "I know what I feel. I also know we don't need to make it a thing right now. You're 14. I'm 21. There's time." "There's time," Harry agreed. The warmth in his chest was very steady. "I just wanted you to know I haven't, it's not one-sided. Whatever it is." "I know," Tonks said. And then, briskly, with the energy of someone who has said the true thing and is now moving efficiently past it before it becomes a whole conversation, "Right. Breakfast. Then you need to meet with Fleur and figure out who's trying to get you killed this time." Harry stood. "You say that like it's a recurring theme." "Harry," she said, standing beside him, "it absolutely is. He met with Fleur in the library at 7 in the morning, before the breakfast crowd arrived. She was already there when he came in, 2 books on the table in front of her, a cup of something hot steaming at her elbow, her pale hair pulled back and her expression carrying the focused quality of someone who had been awake long enough to think things through. She looked up. "You look like you slept." "I did," Harry said. 6 hours. That's about what I usually get." "I got 4, she said, not complaining, just noting. "I was thinking about the first task." He sat across from her. "What do you know?" "Nothing official. But I heard Maxime and Karkaroff speaking last night, not deliberately, I was simply nearby, and there was mention of the creatures that are kept in the forest enclosure." She looked at him steadily. "Dragons, Harry." He absorbed this. "How big?" "Fully grown. 1 per champion." He thought about this the way he thought about most problems that had a solution he hadn't found yet, without panic, which was its own kind of technique. The warmth in his chest pulsed, which he'd come to understand as his magic orienting toward the relevant question. "Who else knows?" "Crumb, almost certainly. Maxime will tell me officially now that I know unofficially." "Cedric," she tilted her head. "Cedric does not know yet." Harry thought about Cedric. He'd spoken to him briefly in the antechamber. The older boy had the quality of someone fundamentally decent, which was already rarer than it should have been at 14, never mind 17. He should know. All 4 of us having the same information levels the competition in a way that's at least honest. Fleur considered this. "He might think you're trying to manipulate him." "He might," Harry said. "But I'd rather tell him and have him think that than not tell him and have him go in unprepared." He paused. "Also, a frightened surprised person near a dragon is a danger to everyone, including the dragon." Her expression did the thing he'd come to recognize from her letters, the slight widening that meant something had landed that she'd agree with but hadn't expected to agree with immediately. "I will come with you when you tell him. It will be easier if we're both there." "Good." He looked at the books she had open. "What are you reading?" "Animagus Theory and the History of Draconic Behavior Patterns." She slid one book toward him. "Read from Chapter 7. The section on threat display versus active aggression. If we understand when the dragon is performing and when it is genuinely attacking, we can work with the gaps." He pulled the book over and read. They sat in the library for 2 hours, reading and occasionally talking, and the quality of the silence between them was exactly what he'd told Tonks, easy, the way things are easy that have been true for a long time. He found Cedric Diggory at the edge of the Quidditch pitch after lunch. Cedric listened to him with the careful attention of someone who is deciding in real time whether they're being played, and Harry let him do the deciding, stated the facts plainly, made no argument beyond the facts. When he finished, Cedric was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me?" Cedric said. "Because it's fair," Harry said. "And because I didn't choose to be in this tournament and I don't particularly care about winning it. I care about everyone coming out of it alive." A pause. "Especially if someone put me in this to set a trap. The last thing I want is bystanders caught in it." Cedric looked at him for a long time, in the way that people sometimes looked at Harry when they'd been expecting something different. Then he held out his hand. Harry shook it. "Thank you," Cedric said. "Don't thank me yet," Harry said. "Figure out what you're doing about the dragon first." The days before the first task had a compressed, peculiar quality, time moving fast and slow simultaneously, the castle carrying on its ordinary business of classes and Quidditch and the social weather of several hundred students, while underneath all of it ran the specific current of something enormous approaching. Harry trained with Fleur where he could, short focused sessions in empty classrooms, working on both summoning charms and the kind of lateral thinking that the task required. Tonks ran him through aura-level shielding techniques on 3 separate evenings in the courtyard, her wand work fluid and demanding, pushing him harder than any of his Hogwarts classes had. Again, she said, one Tuesday evening, after his shield had held against a stunning spell that would have dropped most adults. "Faster." "It held," Harry said. "It held a stunner. In a real situation, you get 3 spells thrown at once from different angles." Again. He went again. And again. By the end of the hour he was faster and his shields were thinner in a way that bothered him. "Good," Tonks said, lowering her wand. "The speed is right. Now you need the power back." "Can't have both yet," Harry said. "No," she agreed. "But you're 14 and you're throwing shields that would hold against an Auror's best shot. That's not where most 14-year-olds are." "Where are most 14-year-olds?" "Struggling with Expelliarmus," she said dryly. He showered and dressed and came back out to find Tonks sitting on the courtyard wall eating an apple, her pink hair gone silver-white in the moonlight, and he sat beside her and they were quiet for a while in the specific comfortable silence of 2 people who have talked enough that silence is also a form of conversation. "How are Ron and Hermione taking all this?" she asked. "Hermione's research mode," Harry said. "She's found 4 volumes on draconic behavior, a treatise on the Triwizard Tournament's history, and has opinions about all of it. Ron is," he paused. "Ron is Ron. He was odd about it for about a week." "The fame thing?" "Partly. Also I think he genuinely didn't know whether I'd put my name in and didn't want to ask me directly." "Did you tell him you hadn't?" "He figured it out on his own and apologized," Harry said. "That was the right way for it to go. I wasn't going to perform being hurt by it to make him feel better faster." Tonks looked at him. "No," she said quietly. "You wouldn't." "But he came around," Harry said. "He's loyal, Ron. Underneath all the noise. When it matters, he's there." She nodded. "Then, Fleur?" Harry was quiet for a moment. He tried to find the right shape of it. You know how some people move through spaces and the spaces change around them? Not in a showing-off way. Just in a way where the room is different when they're in it. I know what you mean, Tonks said. She's like that. And she's been fighting against people noticing that her whole life, because most of what people notice is the surface. And she's been fighting to be taken seriously for so long that I think sometimes she doesn't know what to do with someone who just, he stopped. Who just what? Tonks said softly. Who already takes her seriously without needing her to earn it. The silence after that was a different kind. Not uncomfortable, the opposite, actually, the kind that comes after something true has been said and doesn't need following up. We're going to be fine, aren't we? Tonks said. It wasn't quite a question. The three of us? Harry said. Yeah. He thought about it seriously, which was what she'd asked for without asking. He thought about the warmth that had been there for 7 years, the deep ancient certainty of it, the way it had never diminished or confused itself or needed anything other than time and honesty to develop into something real. Yes, he said. I think we are. The first task came on a Tuesday in November. Harry sat in the tent with the other champions, waiting, and the warmth in his chest was banked and ready, not nervous, just ready, which was a distinction he'd come to understand over 3 years of Tonks pushing him through scenarios that were designed to make him nervous and then training him past the nervousness into something more functional. Cedric went first. Harry could hear the crowd from inside the tent, could feel the vibrations of the Welsh Green's protest through the ground itself, and he sat very still and thought about what he was going to do and whether the thinking had covered everything it needed to cover. He'd decided against using a broom. Not because the summoning charm wouldn't work, he'd practiced it until he could pull his firebolt across the length of the school in under 4 seconds, but because the dragon they'd drawn for him was a Hungarian horntail, which was faster and more aggressive than any of the others, and a broom made him a moving target in 3-dimensional space against something that was designed to hunt moving targets in 3-dimensional space. He'd watched Fleur go. She'd used a sleeping charm, partial application, which was elegant and had mostly worked before the dragon stirred and she'd had to improvise, but she'd come out without serious injury and with full marks from Bagman. Crumb had been surgical. Partial blinding spell, which was brutal but effective. Cedric had used a transfiguration that had impressed Harry genuinely, Hogwarts standard instruction but applied with a lateral creativity that showed the older boy's quality. Harry walked out into the arena when his name was called and the noise hit him like something physical, not just the crowd but the horntail itself, the massive creature already tracking him with its golden eyes, head low, the ridge of black spines along its back raised. He stood still. The horntail's head moved, reading him, recalibrating. Large things that hunt moving prey have a specific response to things that stop moving, a momentary pause, a reassessment. Harry had read this in the book Fleur had given him, had verified it with Tonks who'd had aura-level training on dangerous creatures, had thought about it until he understood not just the fact but the reason. He had 6 seconds before the dragon decided standing still was also a threat posture. He used 2 of them to raise his wand and cast. Not the summoning charm. Something he'd been developing quietly since September, in the evenings after Tonks's training sessions, a modification of Ventus that Tonks had called theoretically unsound and then watched him cast 3 times in a row and revised her opinion. He drove it into the ground in front of the horntail's 4 feet, not at the dragon, near it, and the concussive wave rolled under its feet and the horntail lurched, its balance disrupted, its head swinging, and in the swing Harry was already moving, not away from it but parallel, around the edge of the arena toward the nest. The crowd noise changed register. He'd seen tournament crowds before, the Quidditch World Cup, in its different way, and he knew how they sounded when they decided this was either incredible or insane. Both, probably. The horntail recovered faster than he'd estimated. They always did. He'd built in margin for that. He was already within 10 yards of the nest when it turned, already dropping into a crouch that put the nest's rim between himself and the dragon's line of fire, and the horntail breathed and the fire went over him like a wave of impossible heat and he felt it on his back and kept moving. The golden egg was at the center. He wrapped his hand around it. The horntail's tail came around in a horizontal sweep that he'd been watching for and went over his head by 8 inches because he'd counted to 3 and dropped. He was on the ground, egg in one hand, wand in the other, and the dragon was above him, and he cast the blinding charm that Crumb had used, faster, tighter, aimed at a single eye rather than trying to wash across both, because the horntail's eye diameter was smaller and he needed to be accurate, and the dragon recoiled, the great head jerking back, and Harry rolled clear and stood up. The noise from the stands was not a crowd sound anymore. It was something past that. He walked to the exit with the egg under his arm, and when he reached the competitor's area the Medowitch was already moving toward him, and he held up his hand to slow her down, not rudely, just indicating he needed one moment, and he turned back and looked at the arena, at the horntail, now calmed, already surrounded by handlers, the blindness temporary and reversible. "Good girl," he said, quietly, to the dragon, who could not hear him. It was the principle of the thing. He came around the canvas partition and Fleur was there, and she crossed to him in 3 steps and her hands went to his face, checking him with the quick focused efficiency of someone who has been waiting to do this and is doing it properly now that the moment has arrived. His cheek was singed. His left hand had a burn across the knuckles. She looked at both and said something in rapid French that he was fairly sure translated as "you absolute idiot" and also "I'm so glad you're all right," both of which he thought were equally accurate. "I'm fine," he said. "Your hand is burned." "That's fine too." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite exasperation. "Your definition of fine is unconventional," he agreed. She was still holding his face and they were looking at each other and both of them were aware of it and neither of them moved for a moment, and it was the first time since they'd been children that the warmth had a physical correlate, actually being present, in the same space, her hands on his face and the golden light of the afternoon hitting the pale of her hair and her grey-blue eyes very close. She stepped back. He let her, because there was time, because there was always going to be time. Tonks appeared from the competitor's tent doorway wearing her aura robes and an expression she was controlling very carefully. She looked at Harry's burned hand and said, "Medowitch." "Now." "I was getting there," Harry said. "You were standing there being dramatic about the dragon." "I was acknowledging the dragon." "Medowitch," Tonks said firmly. He went. Behind him he heard Fleur say something to Tonks in a low voice and Tonks respond, and he didn't catch the words but the tone was different than he'd expected. Warm. Direct. 2 people who had been preparing for the same thing from different directions and had just arrived at the same place. He thought about that while the Medowitch dealt with his hand. The second task was on a Sunday in February, and 2 nights before it he cracked the egg's clue in the prefect's bathroom with help from Cedric and Hermione, who had been researching independently and arrived at the same conclusion from different angles, which was vary them. Gillyweed. He needed an hour underwater. Something taken from him. He thought about what they'd take. The tournament had a logic to it, it took the thing you'd think first of. The thing most legible to the outside world as important. And he thought, with a cold feeling that was different from fear, about who was here and who could be found and taken. Ron. Hermione. Maybe one of them. He was wrong about who. He was wrong because he'd made an error he almost never made, he'd assumed the tournament's logic was based on public perception. He'd forgotten that the tournament had been compromised from the start, that whoever had arranged this was watching him specifically, and that there was a category of person who mattered to him in a way that wasn't public knowledge but was visible to anyone who'd been paying the right kind of attention. He stood at the bottom of the lake in the greenlit cold with the gillyweed's hour running and he found them, 4 figures drifting in suspended animation, tethered to the lakebed. Ron, for Crumb. A girl from Beaux Batons for Fleur. A young girl, Gabrielle, her sister. And for Cedric, Cho Chang. And tied beside Ron, very still, his pink hair gone dark underwater and his uniform absent and her aura robes replaced by simple clothes, Tonks. Harry stood there for a full 4 seconds, which was long in a competition where time mattered. Then he moved. He had one rule about this tournament: he was not leaving anyone behind who could be brought. He knew the official logic, one hostage per champion, but the official logic had already proved suspect and he'd been operating on his own principles since September. He cut all 5 of them free, one after another, and he propelled them toward the surface in pairs, using a charm that Tonks had specifically taught him for underwater work when he told her what the clue involved. He came up last. He came up last by 30 seconds and he broke the surface to noise that was past all previous noise, the crowd standing, the judges with their scorecards, and there at the edge of the wooden platform, wrapped in a towel and still coughing lake water but upright and fully present, Tonks, looking at him with an expression that was beyond words. She crossed to him when he pulled himself out of the lake, still dripping, and she grabbed his arm in a grip that was not tender at all and was also entirely tender. "You absolute, I know," he said. "You took 30 extra seconds to, I know," he said. She stopped. She was shaking slightly and he wasn't sure if it was the cold or something else. "You didn't have to take everyone." "I know that too," he said. She looked at him for a long moment and then she pulled him into her arms, properly, both arms around him, soaking wet and shaking slightly and warm underneath the cold, and he held on because it was the obvious thing to do, and the warmth in his chest burned so brightly it was almost visible. Fleur, wrapping her sister in a towel 20 feet away, looked over. Their eyes met across the lake platform. She smiled, small, real, the one that didn't perform anything. He got 3rd place in the second task. Bagman gave him the highest marks for moral fiber, which made Tonks laugh so hard she nearly fell off the platform, and which Harry thought was probably the best description he'd ever received. The 3rd task was a maze. He went in knowing it was the end of something. Knowing the trap would spring here. Knowing that the warmth in his chest had taken on the quality it sometimes had before something significant, not warning him off, never that, just making sure he was fully present. Fully himself. He found the Triwizard Cup in the center of the maze and he looked at it for 3 full seconds before touching it. Not hesitating. Thinking. About port keys. About the fact that the cup was the only object in the maze that every champion had been clearly pointed toward, which meant if the trap was built into the tournament, the trap was the cup. He turned to call out to Cedric, who had arrived at the clearing beside him, and Cedric was already watching him with the expression of someone who has reached the same conclusion. "It's a port key," Harry said. Cedric looked at the cup. "I think so too." "Don't touch it." "Agreed." Cedric turned, wand up. Then the spell hit Cedric from the left, stunning him, dropping him to the grass, and Harry spun and had his shield up before the second spell arrived and it broke against the shield with a crack that lit the maze around them and Wormtail stepped out of the hedgerow with a wand and a face contorted with the specific expression of someone following orders they don't enjoy. Harry disarmed him in one motion. Wormtail was not a skilled duelist, he was an instrument, always had been, and instruments don't account for the person on the other end who is faster and angrier and has been building toward this without knowing it. He held Wormtail at one point and thought about what to do with him, and what he thought was, not here. Not like this. I need information more than I need satisfaction. He bound Wormtail with an incarceration charm and summoned a magical flare that Tonks had told him in September was the standard aura signal for prisoner secured, send backup. She had specifically made him learn it, and then he revived Cedric and stood over both of them and waited, and when he heard the sound of running in the maze he said loudly, "It's Harry Potter, I have a prisoner, don't hex me." Tonks came around the hedge at a dead run and stopped when she saw the scene and said, very quietly, "Oh, you absolute legend." Wormtail looked up at Harry from the ground with the terrified eyes of someone who had expected something and gotten something entirely else, and Harry looked back at him and said, "You're going to tell us where Voldemort is." "Not tonight, not like this." "But you're going to tell us." Wormtail said nothing. "That's all right," Harry said. "There's time." He'd said that before. He kept finding it true. The maze was lit by fire and noise and the sound of more auras arriving from the perimeter, and somewhere above the chaos the sky was very large and very dark and very full of stars, and Harry stood in the center of all of it exactly as he intended to stand in everything, present, unfrightened, working the problem, the warmth in his chest burning clear and constant as ever. Chapter 4, What We Build While the World Burns. The Ministry's official position, released 3 days after the third task, was that Peter Pettigrew had acted alone. Harry read the statement in the Daily Prophet over breakfast on a Thursday morning in June, the last week of term, and he read it twice and then set it down with a care that was probably more deliberate than it needed to be. Beside him, Hermione had gone very still in the way she went still when something made her angry and she was deciding what to do with the anger. Ron was making a noise somewhere between a snort and something more serious. "Alone," Ron said. "That's what it says," Harry said. Pettigrew, alone, somehow engineered a complex portkey trap inside the Triwizard Tournament security perimeter, without help, without direction, without. Hermione stopped herself. She picked up her orange juice. "This is fudge." "Yes," Harry said. "He's covering something." "Yes. He's covering Voldemort," she said, quietly enough that only their immediate section of the table could hear, and even then the name made the third year beside Ron flinch visibly. Pettigrew was a Death Eater. Pettigrew's whole purpose was, "I know," Harry said. "Fudge knows too." "That's not the problem. The problem is that knowing and being willing to act on what you know are completely different things when acting means admitting the war is starting again." He looked at the prophet. "He's going to do this all year. Every piece of evidence, every witness account, every detail that doesn't fit the narrative he's chosen, he'll push it down or spin it or simply refuse to acknowledge it." Hermione looked at him with the expression she developed over 3 years of knowing him, the one that combined "I agree with all of this and I hate that you're right" in roughly equal measure. "So what do we do?" Harry had been thinking about this since June 2nd, the night of the third task. He'd been thinking about it in the precise and patient way he thought about problems that had solutions but required time to locate them. He'd talked to Tonks about it, letters going back and forth in July and August after school ended, and he'd talked to Fleur about it too. Fleur was back at Beauxbatons finishing her final year, her letters arriving with Seve's characteristic precision, the two of them building something across distance that letters were almost adequate for and sometimes were not. "We build something of our own," Harry said. "Something that doesn't depend on the prophet or the ministry or the official version of events." Ron looked up. "Like what?" "Like people who know the truth and know how to use it." Harry kept his voice even. "If Fudge is going to spend this year telling everyone Voldemort isn't back, someone needs to be making sure that when he can't deny it anymore, there are people already trained and ready." The silence after that was a thinking silence rather than a shocked one, which told Harry something useful about where his friends were. Fifth year arrived with the specific quality of a year that knew it was important. The castle felt different, charged, the way air feels before a storm that hasn't decided to break yet. Dumbledore had a new teacher for defense against the dark arts that the whole school had opinions about before they'd even met her, and Harry arrived at the first lesson with his mind open and his conclusions undrawn, which was his standard operating procedure for new information. Dolores Umbridge walked into the defense classroom in pale pink robes and a smile that had the temperature of something preserved rather than alive, and Harry looked at her for about 45 seconds and understood clearly that whatever Fudge had told her to do, she had agreed to and probably improved upon. She explained the curriculum. Theory. No practical application. The defensive arts could be taught through understanding the principles rather than through practice, she said, in the specific tone of someone who has chosen language very carefully to sound reasonable while describing something that wasn't. Harry waited until she was finished. "There's a problem with that," he said. The classroom went attentive in a way that was different from normal classroom attention. Umbridge turned to him with the smile fully operational. "I'm sorry." "Defense theory without practice," Harry said. "The problem is that the practical and the theoretical aren't separable in defensive magic. Understanding the principle of a shield charm doesn't protect you from a curse. You need the muscle memory, the instinct, those only come from practice. He was being completely straightforward, not aggressive, just stating facts in the same tone he'd have used to describe the weather. Umbridge's smile hadn't moved. That was the tell, the smile that didn't respond to content. The Ministry's research indicates, with respect, Harry said, the Ministry's research is going to be tested eventually, and when it is, we'll find out whether the theory was sufficient. I'd rather not be present for that test without preparation. The smile did something then, it developed an undertone. Something that had teeth in it, despite remaining a smile. You seem very confident in your own judgment, Mr. Potter. I'm confident in observable facts, Harry said. That's different. She gave him his first educational decree detention for that, which he thought was honest at least. She wasn't pretending the detention was for anything other than disagreeing with her. He respected honesty in villains more than pretense, even when the honesty was being used against him. He served the detention, came back to the common room with his hand aching from the blood quill in a way he kept to himself because telling people immediately would cause a reaction he wasn't ready to manage yet, and sat down with Ron and Hermione and said, "We need to start the defense group." Getting people into a room was the easy part. Harry had not understood his own reputation fully until he started asking people to come to a meeting in the Hog's Head and discovered that the number of Hogwarts students who would show up based solely on Harry Potter asking them was significantly larger than he'd accounted for. He stood in the Hog's Head's back room with 27 students arranged around him and Hermione's list in her hand, and he thought clearly about what he wanted to say versus what would be easy to say and chose the harder version. "If you're here because of who I am," he said, "that's not a good reason. Famous doesn't mean useful. My name in the papers doesn't mean I know what I'm talking about." The room shifted. He continued. "Here's what I actually know. I've been in 3 direct confrontations with Voldemort." The name landed like a stone in water, ripples of reaction. He waited for them to settle. "The first when I was 1 year old and don't remember. The second at the end of first year. The third at the end of third year. I've faced trolls, basilisks, dementors, Death Eaters, a compromise tournament, and in June, Peter Pettigrew. I'm not telling you this to impress you." He looked around the room, at the faces processing, at Neville's thoughtful expression, at Ginny Weasley's determined one, at Luna Lovegood who was the only person in the room who seemed entirely unsurprised by any of this. "I'm telling you because those are my actual qualifications. Not my name. What I've done and what I've learned from doing it." Hermione was looking at him with an expression that said several things at once, most of them variations on "this is the right approach, I didn't know you were going to take it, I'm revising my preparatory notes accordingly. The Ministry has decided we don't need practical defense training," Harry said. "I think that's wrong, and I think it's going to matter that it's wrong. So I want to teach you. Practical spellwork, defensive techniques, the kind of thing you'll actually need if this comes to a real fight, because I think it's going to come to a real fight." A pause. "Are you in?" 27 people said yes. The DA was born. They met twice a week in the Room of Requirement, which had Harry's deepest appreciation from the first time he discovered it, the room that became what it needed to be, no more complicated than that, pure functional magic. They spread out across the mirrored space and Harry taught, which was something he discovered he was good at in a way he hadn't known to expect. He taught the way he'd been taught, not by explaining and waiting, but by doing and adjusting, watching what each person was doing wrong, not to criticize but to understand the mechanism of the error and find the specific adjustment that fixed it. He watched Neville, who was improving session by session, the raw talent always having been there under the specific curse of self-doubt, and he found ways to build the confidence alongside the skill. He watched Ginny, who had a natural aggression in her spellwork that was one of the better things he'd seen and just needed direction. He watched Luna, who did things with magic that didn't follow any standard pattern and were somehow correct anyway, and he stopped trying to straighten her technique and started trying to understand it instead. After the 3rd session, Hermione said, "You're a good teacher." "I'm learning as I go," Harry said. "That's what makes you good at it," she said. "You're not pretending you already know everything." He thought about Tonks, the way she'd trained him, the push past comfortable, the demand for speed and then accuracy and then both, and thought that he was probably replicating what had worked on him without having consciously decided to. He wrote to Tonks about the DA. Her letter back arrived within 48 hours, which was fast even for Seve, and it said, "Yes, yes, exactly yes, teach them the disarming charm first and the shield charm second and make sure they understand these two will get them through more situations than anything else, and Harry, be careful. What you're building will scare people who need things to be manageable." He wrote to Fleur and she wrote back a longer letter, analytical and precise, about the history of unofficial resistance groups in magical conflicts, about what they required to be sustainable, about the importance of people believing in what they were doing rather than just the person leading it. "The moment they are following you because of your name rather than because they understand the cause," she wrote, "is the moment you have to recalibrate. Leaders create dependency. Educators create capability. Be the educator." He kept both letters, read them again the night before each DA meeting. Umbridge escalated, as tyrants do, through incremental steps each of which could be individually justified and collectively constituted something unjustifiable. Educational decrees multiplied. The inquisitorial squad appeared, Malfoy at its center, which Harry had anticipated, and which he found less concerning than Umbridge herself because Malfoy's cruelty was personal and therefore readable. Umbridge's was institutional, which was harder to predict and harder to argue against because it came wrapped in the language of authority. She inspected classes. She installed herself as High Inquisitor with the specific appetite of someone who has been given permission to do what they've always wanted to do. She went after Trelawney, who was harmless and strange and had done nothing to deserve it. She went after Hagrid, who was large and kind and had done nothing either. She went after McGonagall, who was neither harmless nor particularly manageable, and that one was something to watch. McGonagall, when Umbridge said something dismissive about Harry's future prospects in a meeting Harry was present for, turned and said, "Potter, you have my full recommendation for any field of pursuit you choose to undertake, and anyone who suggests otherwise will hear from me directly." She said it in the tone she usually reserved for structural load-bearing statements and then turned back to her papers, and Umbridge's smile had the specific quality of something that has encountered a wall and is deciding whether to go around it or through it. Harry thought, these are the people worth protecting. These are the people the DA is for, not just the students in it, but everyone who has stayed here and kept doing their jobs while the building around them is being slowly dismantled. He didn't tell McGonagall about the DA. He told Dumbledore nothing. He told Tonks everything, and Tonks was in the Order of the Phoenix and was therefore walking a careful line between her official position and what she was actually doing. "I'm technically supposed to report suspicious student activity," she wrote in November. "Are you going to?" Harry wrote back. "I'm currently unable to verify any suspicious student activity," she wrote back. "All student behavior appears to be within normal parameters." What a coincidence. He wrote her back a single line, "Thank you." Her response, "Shut up and teach your students." Christmas came and went with the particular cold clarity that Hogwarts had in December, the grounds going frost-white and the castle going warm with fires, and most students left and some stayed and Harry stayed because there was work to do here that he wasn't done with. On the 23rd of December, he had a vision. He was in the corridor outside the headmaster's office, late, unable to sleep, when it happened, not like sleep, not with the quality of a dream, but with the total immersive certainty of something real. Mr. Weasley, in the Department of Mysteries. The snake. The blood. He was inside the snake, seeing through its eyes, and the horror of it was not just what was happening but what it said about the connection he had to Voldemort, which he had known existed and had been trying not to think about too carefully. He ran. He found McGonagall, and then Dumbledore, and it moved quickly after that, the painting network, the Order, Tonks's face when she came through the fireplace and Harry was standing there in the middle of the night looking like he'd just felt something terrible because he had. She looked at him and didn't ask if he was all right because she could see he wasn't. "Arthur's going to be okay," she said. Not a promise, a projection. She'd seen the layout, she understood the nature of the wound, she was reasoning out loud for his benefit. I was inside the snake, Harry said. Her face did something careful. How long has that been happening? Since this year started. Flashes. Brief ones. Dumbledore's been, he stopped, because Dumbledore had been avoiding him, specifically and noticeably, all year, and he was still working out what to do with that information. There's a connection between me and Voldemort. I knew it existed, but I didn't know it went this far. Tonks was quiet for a moment, thinking rather than reacting. This was one of the things he valued most about her, the thinking before the responding, the separation of feeling from analysis without pretending the feeling wasn't there. A clemency, she said. Dumbledore's going to suggest Snape. Will you do it? Harry thought about Snape, the complicated, genuine capability of the man running alongside the specific cruelty that he deployed at Harry like it was owed, like it was something he was cleaning from himself by directing it outward. He thought about Tonks's initial warning, not everyone who wants to protect you has your interests first. I'll try, Harry said. But if he uses it to take things he shouldn't take, I'll stop. Okay, Tonks said. That's reasonable. She paused. Also, separately, and I'm going to say this carefully, if the connection goes in both directions, that means it can potentially be used strategically. Not by you going into him. The other way. Feeding him false information. Someday. Not yet. Not until you can close the door properly and choose when it's open. She looked at him. Just putting it in the record. He filed it the way he filed everything useful. How's Fleur? The question was slightly left field and Tonks knew it and also understood it, in the middle of something hard, checking on the things that were steady. Good. She wrote me last week, actually. She's back in France, her grandmother is teaching her something about Vila magic that apparently is complicated and worth knowing. Harry, she's really good, you know. As a person. I know I'm telling you what you already know. It helps to hear it, he said. Tonks put her hand on the back of his neck, briefly, the kind of grounding contact that had no agenda except presence. Get some sleep. I'll be here in the morning. The occlumency lessons with Snape were exactly what Harry had expected and worse in specific ways he hadn't. Snape drove into his mind with the battering persistence of someone who either didn't know a more precise technique or who preferred this one, and Harry held what he could hold and lost what he couldn't, and Snape watched the fragments that surfaced with an expression that was very controlled and contained something complex about Harry's father. What Harry also found, in the months of this, was that Snape was blocking him. Showing him the door and slamming it before Harry could see through it, which meant Snape had things he was protecting in the same architecture Harry was being told to protect his own. He noted this. The connection to Voldemort kept surging when Harry was tired or emotionally off-center, and the DA was the thing that most consistently centered him, the 2 hours in the room of requirement where the work was specific and practical and the people around him were genuinely getting better and knew it. Neville, in February, cast a perfect reducto that shattered a practice dummy into components and then looked at his own wand hand with an expression that Harry had been waiting to see, not the surprise of someone who got lucky, but the recognition of someone who has found something that was always theirs. Again, Harry said, the same word Tonks always used. Neville did it again. Faster. Cleaner. Good, Harry said. Neville looked up and said, very quietly, my parents are in St. Mungo's. Bellatrix Lestrange put them there. He said it with a flatness that wasn't emptiness. It was the way you speak about a true thing that has had all the shock processed out of it over years and what remains is just the fact. I want to be ready for when it matters. Actually ready. You're getting there, Harry said, and he meant it without qualification. Fleur arrived on a Saturday in March. Not unannounced, she'd written a week prior to say she'd be in England for a ministry function with her father and could she come to Hogsmeade, and Harry had written back immediately, and the week between had had the quality of time moving slower than it should. He met her outside the Three Broomsticks on a grey March afternoon, frost still in the air despite it technically being spring, and she was in a deep blue coat that was unquestionably French in the way some things just are, her hair down, and she looked at him as he came down the high street and smiled, the real one. They sat inside over butterbeers and talked for 3 hours. Not about the binding, not about the war, not about any of the large and serious things, or not only those. They talked about her grandmother's teachings, which were fascinating and strange, about the specific quality of Vela magic that predated wand magic in the way ancient magic predated both. They talked about Beau's batons, her finished degree, what she intended to do with herself. She was thinking about the French Auror service, she said, or perhaps spell development research, or perhaps both. She hadn't decided yet. She was still in the process of finding out what she wanted rather than what she was expected to want. "What do you want?" Harry asked. She considered this seriously. To be competent and honest. To build things that last. To not be underestimated. A pause. To be in rooms where I am known rather than displayed. Harry looked at her across the table, at the grey-blue eyes that were very direct and always had been, and said, "You're known here." She held the look for a moment. "I know," she said. "That's why I can say it." They were quiet for a bit, the warm noise of the 3 broomsticks around them, and then Fleur said, "Tonks wrote me about the visions. About Voldemort's connection to you." "I'm managing it," Harry said. "I know you are." She wrapped her hands around her butterbeer. "I want to learn more about the binding. Properly. My grandmother knows things about ancient magic that I don't, that most people don't. I've been asking her, carefully. She says," she stopped, choosing her words. "She says the binding creates a resonance. Between the 3 of you. That it doesn't just connect, it amplifies and it protects." She was not specific about mechanism, but she was clear about the protective property. Harry thought about this. How does it protect? She didn't say exactly. She said we would understand it when we needed to. Fleur's expression was a degree skeptical of this answer, which Harry found reassuring. "I don't like, you will know when you need to. It feels like an excuse not to explain things." "Same," Harry said. "But I believe the protective thing. I've felt it, when something should have been worse than it was, when I came through something that statistically I shouldn't have." He thought about the horntail. About the lake. About June. There's a margin. Something that holds, even when everything else is at the limit. Fleur nodded slowly. "I have felt it too. Even at distance." "Yeah," Harry said. She looked at him in the direct way that she had, the specific quality of attention that didn't flinch and didn't perform and was simply entirely present. "Are you afraid?" He thought about the visions. About Voldemort's voice in his head, the presence that was trying to use the connection for something Harry hadn't fully identified yet. About the year that was waiting after this afternoon, the Department of Mystery's dream that kept returning with an intensity the others didn't. "No," he said. I take it seriously." "That's different." "Yes," she said. "That is different." She reached across the table and put her hand over his briefly, not holding, just present, and then she took it back. "Whatever is coming, I am not going to be at a distance for it. I'm making arrangements." "What arrangements?" "I'm going to be in England." She said it plainly, without drama. "Permanently, for the foreseeable. I'm arranging work here. My father has contacts in the British ministry, there are positions." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking your permission. I am telling you because I believe in information over surprises." Harry felt the warmth in his chest turn over, warm and steady. "I'm glad," he said. Simply, without performance. "Good," she said, equally simply. The vision came on a Thursday night in June, final exams nearly done, the year winding toward its end, and it was the clearest and most terrible one yet. His godfather. Sirius Black, who Harry had met at the end of third year under circumstances that had been simultaneously wonderful and then stolen away, Sirius in the Department of Mysteries, trapped, in danger, calling for help. Harry woke up with it roaring through him, and he was already moving before he was fully conscious of having decided to move, because this was the shape of the trap he'd known was coming, had known since September, and knowing a trap is coming and experiencing it are completely different things when the bait is someone you love. He tried the fire in Umbridge's office. He found Sirius, not trapped, at home, not in danger, confused by Harry's urgency. He felt the terrible specific relief of that, and then he felt something else, the quality of the vision, the way it had been so precise, so detailed, so exactly calibrated to produce maximum response. If it were real, he thought, standing in Umbridge's office while his blood went cold, would have already been moving. He was already moving. They found him. Umbridge and her inquisitorial squad, Draco at her side with the specific expression of someone who has caught something and is deciding what to do with it. The office. The captured. Hermione's face doing something Harry recognized as planforming in real time. Hermione told Umbridge about a weapon. Harry let her. He understood what she was doing before she'd finished the first sentence, understood it the way you understand things about people you've known for 4 years through significant events. She was leading Umbridge into the forest, towards something that would neutralize the immediate threat, and she was doing it by appealing to the exact thing that made Umbridge dangerous, the bureaucratic hunger for proof of wrongdoing. In the forest. Grop, and then centaurs, and then, Umbridge's specific variety of institutional cruelty meeting a force that had no framework for ministry authority, that operated on entirely different principles, and the results of that collision were decisive and swift, and Harry felt no particular remorse about any of it. They ran out of the forest, across the grounds, and Neville was running beside him in a way that said everything about the 9 months of DA training, not hesitating, not lagging, just running, his wand in his hand and his face set. 6 of them on thestrals, rising into the night sky over Hogwarts, and London below them growing larger, and the Department of Mysteries ahead, and Harry thinking with absolute clarity, this is the trap. I know it is. I'm going anyway because Sirius might be real. He was right that it was a trap. He was right that he was going anyway. He was not right that Sirius might be real. Sirius was in the kitchen of number 12 Grimmauld Place eating toast, and the trap's architect, who had been in the building across the corridor all year with a fake face and a real eye, had built the bait well. The Department of Mysteries was dark and strange and deliberately disorienting, room after room of objects and phenomena that had no analogue in ordinary life, a space designed for people who spent their careers examining the fundamental nature of reality. Harry moved through it with his wand lit, the others around him, and reached the Hall of Prophecy, and reached shelf 97, and found the globe with his name on it. He picked it up. The Death Eaters came from the dark between the shelves the way dark things always come, fully present where a moment before there was nothing, and Lucius Malfoy stepped forward with that cultured, unhurried quality he wore like a second skin. Harry Potter, Malfoy said. Give me the prophecy. Harry looked at him. 12 Death Eaters, 6 students. The numbers were what they were and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. What he was doing was a rapid assessment of the room, the exits, the specific capability of each Death Eater relative to the specific capability of his 6 people, and he was building a series of problems to create rather than a single solution. Why do you want it? Harry said, which was a genuine question and also a way of buying 30 seconds. It concerns the Dark Lord, Malfoy said. The prophecy was made about me and Voldemort, Harry said. Neither of you can hear it without me. And you can't take it from me without risking it breaking. Malfoy's expression did a small, controlled adjustment. You've thought about this. I think about most things, Harry said. Then, go. The last word was for his 6 people, and they went, not away, but through the immediate formation of Death Eaters, because Harry had said go and they trusted him to mean something specific by it. Neville went left, Hermione and Ron through a gap in the middle, Ginny and Luna the other side, and Harry dropped the globe and shattered it on the floor, which made every Death Eater in the room flinch toward the sound, and in that flinch Harry was already halfway to the door. The fight that followed had the quality of a river, constantly moving, direction changing, no static positions. Room after room of the department, and his people were good, his people were genuinely good, because he had spent 9 months making sure of it. Hermione took a hit in the time room that dropped her. Ron was tangled in the brain room with something that had no precedent in any of their training. Neville took 2 spells in the room with the tanks, held his ground, and broke Malfoy's wand with a reducto that Harry would think about later as one of the most remarkable things he'd ever seen. And then it was down. The Hall of Prophecy again, the order arriving like a change in weather, Tonks first through the door, her wand already up, and Harry felt the warmth surge so powerfully it was almost a sound. She moved like she'd been trained to move, which she had, and she moved like someone who had something specific at stake in this room, which she did. She crossed to Harry's position in 4 strides and stood there, and they were back to back for a moment, and he felt her breathing, steady and controlled, and he steadied to match it. "Nice to see you," he said. 7 against 12, she said, without turning. "You kept them here this long?" 9 months of DA, Harry said. "The training works. You're going to want to be insufferable about that." "For a while, yes," he said, and then 3 Death Eaters came at them from the left and there was no more talking. Sirius came. Sirius fought like someone who had been locked in a house for a year and was spending all of it at once, enormous and alive and laughing, and Harry saw him and felt something that had no word, the complicated love of a person you chose before you were old enough to choose anything, and watched him fight and was fiercely glad he was here. And then Bellatrix. He would think about this later, would think about it many times, the specific sequence of it. Sirius and Bellatrix, the movement, the curse, the veil. The veil. The way the world did not pause for it, did not acknowledge that something irreplaceable had just ended. Harry ran. Not toward anything. Just the momentum of something that needed to find a place to go. He chased Bellatrix into the atrium and he chased her with magic that was running hot, the warmth in his chest turned from steady to burning, and he was angrier than he had been in his life and also clearly enough to use it rather than be used by it, which was the line Tonks had spent years teaching him to find. He used it. He used the anger and the magic together the way they were designed to be used, and Bellatrix ran, and Voldemort arrived instead, and the atrium became something else, the air itself changing, the nature of the space changing. Voldemort tried to possess him. He felt it, the intrusion, the cold alien presence trying to use his body like a house, and it met the warmth in his chest, and it was the warmth's nature to reject what was foreign, and the rejection was absolute and physical, and for a moment Harry experienced the binding for what it actually was, not a connection to 2 people, but an anchor to a version of himself that was so fully occupied there was no room for anything else. He thought about Sirius. Not the loss, not yet, that was coming and would be enormous, he knew that, but the life. The brief warm dinners in Grimmauld Place, the letters, the laugh. The specific joy of having a person who was yours by choice. He thought about Tonks, in that room, at his back, her breathing steady. He thought about Fleur, a grey March afternoon and her hand over his on the table. And Voldemort was gone. Rejected, expelled, the possession collapsing like a structure whose foundation has been removed. Dumbledore arrived, and Fudge arrived with him, and Harry stood in the middle of the ministry's atrium with the cold still echoing through him, and he watched Fudge's face as the minister saw Voldemort disappearing through the fireplaces, watched the specific expression of a man whose entire constructed version of reality has just been publicly dissolved. "He's back," Harry said. He said it simply, to no one in particular and to everyone at once. "He has been back since June of last year. You've known. You chose not to act on it, and this is what that cost." He didn't say it with anger. He said it with the flat certainty of someone stating observable facts, which was worse, actually. Anger can be dismissed, redirected, made to seem unstable. Facts stated clearly by a boy standing in a room full of witnesses in the Ministry of Magic itself, in the atrium where the minister had just personally observed Voldemort, were considerably harder to deflect. Fudge looked at him. Then he looked away. "We'll need statements," he said, to someone over Harry's shoulder. "You'll have them," Harry said. The hospital wing was bright and too quiet for the scale of what had just happened. Hermione was sitting up with color returning to her face. Ron was pale and stitched and going to be fine. Neville had both wrists bandaged and was already explaining to a healer that he'd had worse. Ginny had a set jaw and eyes that were doing the specific accounting that people do after the first real fight, tallying cost, integrating new information about themselves. Luna sat beside Ginny and was eating a grape with a serenity that was either supernatural or simply Luna. Tonks was in the bed at the end of the ward, her left shoulder in a sling, a healer having words with her about the stunning spell she'd taken in the final exchange. She looked up when Harry came to sit beside her and she looked, for the first time in all the years he'd known her, tired in a way that went past physical. "Serious," she said. "Yes," he said. She reached out with her right hand and gripped his. He let her and gripped back. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know." They sat there for a while. Outside the hospital wing windows the grounds were silver with early morning light, the sky doing the thin, exhausted blue of very early dawn. Somewhere in the school Dumbledore was managing the aftermath. Somewhere Fudge was calling emergency press conferences and revising the official position and doing the complicated public performance of having been wrong about something large. "He tried to possess me," Harry said. "Voldemort." "In the atrium." Tonks's hand tightened. "It didn't work," Harry said. "I don't fully understand why, but I think," he paused. "I think the binding. I think it functions as an anchor. Something too full to be displaced." She was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother," she said, thinking of Fleur's letter. "The protective property." "I think so." She let out a long breath. "I need to write to Fleur." "So do I." Separately, Tonks said, and there was something in the way she said it, not jealous, nothing so simple, a kind of acknowledgement of the separateness and the equalness of it that had always been one of the things Harry valued most about her approach to what they were to each other. Separately, Harry agreed. The morning light widened and the ward was warm and the world outside it was already changed, already different, the fiction of safety dissolved, but also something else, something that didn't get acknowledged enough in the accounting of terrible events. He was here. His people were here. The thing they'd built through 9 months of twice-weekly training and honest conversation and the specific commitment to treating each other like real people had held when it was tested. "The DA worked," Harry said. Tonks looked at him sideways. "Yeah," she said. "It did. I'm going to be insufferable about it," he said. "Like I warned you." She laughed. Real, bright, genuine, the tired edges of it making it more real rather than less. "I know," she said. "You've earned it." He had. And tomorrow the world would be harder and larger and the war would be admitted rather than denied, and Sirius would still be gone, and there would be grief to carry, and work to do. But tonight, in the early silver morning, he had this, his people intact, his enemies visible, himself completely himself, and the warmth in his chest burning steady as ever. That was enough to go on with. Chapter 5, The Weight We Carry Forward. The summer after 5th year was the first one Harry spent somewhere other than Privet Drive. Dumbledore had come to collect him personally on the 1st of July, a visit that Petunia Desley received with the expression of someone discovering a structural fault in their house and Vernon received by going somewhere else in it, and had explained, with the specific careful measure of a man who knows he owes an explanation and is deciding how much of it to give, that Harry would be staying at a location known to Order members. That the protection afforded by Petunia's blood would be sufficient without Harry's physical presence there. That arrangements had been made. Harry had packed in 11 minutes. He had not said goodbye. Grimmauld Place was dark and complicated and smelled of old magic and old grief and the specific preservation of a house that had been hated into elegance, and it had Sirius's shape in every room, his absence as present as furniture. Harry walked through it on his first night and felt the grief move through him like weather, real and large and his, not performed. He let it be large because he'd learned through watching other people handle large things that the ones who let grief be the size it actually was were the ones who could move afterward. He sat in the kitchen at midnight with a cup of tea going cold in his hands, and Tonks came in and sat across from him without asking, and neither of them said anything for a while. He was happy, Harry said finally. The last time I saw him properly. At Christmas. He was making Creature do things that weren't tasks and watching the house elf be furious about it, and he'd cooked something terrible for dinner and was genuinely proud of it. He looked at the cold tea. I want to remember that one. Not the atrium. That's the right one to keep, Tonks said. I know. He looked up. Are you all right? She'd known Sirius through the Order. Through Remus, who was her cousin by the complicated adjacency of the Black family. She'd liked him, Harry knew this from her letters, from the way she'd spoken about him in the months of the Order's reformation. Getting there, she said. It helps that it was him. That it was fully him at the end. Not the him that was in Azkaban for 12 years being slowly taken apart. The actual Sirius. She paused. That sounds strange. It doesn't, Harry said. She leaned back in her chair. Her hair was a muted brown tonight, which meant she wasn't actively choosing anything, which was her version of not being dressed for company. Remus is bad, she said quietly. I mean he's functioning, he came back to the Order and he's doing his work, but he's bad. He and Sirius were the last of their particular group. He's the last one now. Harry thought about Remus, the lined, careful face, the quality of someone who had lost things and had learned to build around the losses rather than through them. I'll talk to him. He'd like that. A pause. He worries about you. Not in the managing way. You matter to him. He matters to me too, Harry said. They sat until the tea was fully cold and the night had moved toward 3 in the morning, and then Tonks said she had a 6 a.m. briefing and went to sleep, and Harry sat alone a little longer with the grief and the weight of the year and thought about what came next. What came next was a prophecy he'd broken on the floor of the Hall of Prophecy without hearing a word of it. Dumbledore told him the full text in July. He came to Grimmauld Place on a Wednesday evening with his silver beard and his complicated eyes and his specific quality of a man who has been carrying information he's chosen to carry alone, and he told Harry. All of it. The prediction, the 2 candidates, the choosing that had happened not at birth but at Voldemort's hand. Neither can live while the other survives. Harry listened to all of it without interrupting. When Dumbledore was done, Harry said, "You've known this since before I was born." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "You didn't tell me." "No. Because you were afraid I'd make choices that complicated your plan." Dumbledore looked at him over the half-moon glasses, and Harry held the look steadily and without particular anger, because he'd moved past the place where Dumbledore's management of him required anger, it required clarity, which was a different and more sustainable response. "I was afraid," Dumbledore said, and the honesty in it was notable, "of many things. Some of them involved you specifically. Some involved the weight of asking someone so young to understand so much." "I've been ready for more than you gave me," Harry said. "Not an accusation, just an observation. The management was yours, not mine. I want that understood." "It is," Dumbledore said quietly. "It is understood." "Right," Harry said. "Then tell me everything. Not in pieces. Not calibrated for what you think I can handle. Everything." Dumbledore told him everything. It took 2 hours and Harry listened to all of it, the Horcruxes, the fragments of soul, the specific nature of Voldemort's near immortality and what had to be done about it. He asked questions when the information required questions and was quiet when it required thought, and at the end of it he sat with the full weight of what had been handed to him, and he did not perform either courage or fear. What he felt was specific and clear. This was his. This was the work, and it was enormous, and it was his. Who else knows the full scope? Harry said. Minerva knows the broad strokes. The Order knows parts of it. Dumbledore paused. Tonks and Fleur Delacour, he said, with a particular precision, have been researching aspects of ancient magic that are adjacent to the Horcrux question. I understand they've been in correspondence with you. Yes, Harry said. Since I was 7. Dumbledore looked at him. I know, he said, and there was something in it, old knowledge, observed over years, accepted. The binding is real. I recognized it when I first properly looked at you, at 11. I chose not to address it because I thought, he stopped himself, which was unusual. I thought addressing it would change what you were to me. Strategically. And that was wrong of me, and I acknowledge it. Harry held the look for a long moment. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. I know, Harry said. That's why I thanked you. Fleur arrived in London in August with 2 trunks and a direction of travel. Harry met her at King's Cross, which felt appropriate, the place where journeys started, where platforms existed between the ordinary world and the one that was larger and stranger. She came through the main entrance with her trunks on a trolley and Seve in a cage and her pale hair catching the August light, and she saw him and walked directly to him without hesitation, and he thought, 3 years of letters and she crosses a station like she knows exactly where she's going. She stopped in front of him and looked at him properly, the way she always looked, with her full attention rather than part of it. Then she said, You've grown. I'm 16, Harry said. You look older than that. People keep saying that, Harry said. I think they mean something else by it. They mean you look like someone who has dealt with things, she said. That is true. It is also true that you are taller. He took one of her trunks without asking, which she accepted without comment, not because she couldn't manage it but because the gesture was what it was, and she understood gestures. They walked out of King's Cross into the August afternoon and she said, Tell me about the Horcruxes. He told her. Standing at a bus stop waiting for the number 43, because the ministry had restrictions on magical travel from King's Cross and Tonks had strict instructions about not splinching themselves, Harry told Fleur everything Dumbledore had told him and she listened with the organized attention that was one of her most characteristic qualities, and asked 3 questions at points where the logic required questions. 7 fragments, she said, when he was done. He may have intended 6 plus himself, but the diary and the ring are destroyed. So 5 remaining, in theory. We don't know all the locations. We will, she said with a certainty that was not bravado, she just stated it like a fact she was committing to making true. He looked at her sideways. You've been thinking about this. Since your letter in May, she said. My grandmother has spent 2 months with me on the theory of soul magic. How a Horcrux works, what happens to the fragment contained, the vulnerability that the containment creates. She paused. The fragment inside you. The bus came and they got on and found seats and the city moved past outside, red brick and grey sky and London going about its ordinary business around 2 people carrying something extraordinary. I know, Harry said. You've known for a while, she said. Not a question. Since 5th year. Maybe earlier, in the way you know things before you have language for them. He looked at his hands, at the faint scar on his right knuckle from the blood quill. The killing curse at Godric's Hollow. It should have worked. It hit a soul that was going to die anyway, a soul that had destroyed its own container. And a piece of it went, it needed somewhere to go, and I was there, and I survived, and the piece came with me. And the binding, Fleur said carefully. The ancient magic, does it know? Harry thought about the possession attempt in the atrium. The warmth rising up and the cold foreign presence meeting it and being rejected absolutely. It knows, he said. I think it's been managing it. Keeping the fragment from doing what fragments of Voldemort's soul tend to do, which is, influence. Your grandmother's protective property, Fleur said, more to herself than to him. Probably yes. She was quiet for a few stops. Then, so we cannot destroy the one inside you in the same way as the others. No, Harry said. The killing curse would destroy it. Along with everything else. That is not an option, she said, flatly, with a finality that closed the subject like a door. I know, Harry said. I'm working on another one. Bill Weasley had been courting Fleur since the previous autumn, which Harry had known from Fleur's letters in the way you know things that you are deciding how to feel about. She'd mentioned Bill, mentioned his quality, the specific thing about him that was genuine and direct in a way she valued, and Harry had read those letters with the clarity about himself that the binding had always required. He was 16. He understood what he felt about Fleur and had understood it for some time in the way you understand things that are large and patient and not going anywhere. It wasn't urgent because it didn't need to be, because the binding was not a countdown timer, it was simply there, and the being there was enough for now. He liked Bill. When he met him properly at the Burrow in August, the eldest Weasley had the quality of someone who had been in Egypt excavating curse-broken tombs for years and had come back with a specific relationship to danger that was neither reckless nor fearful, experienced, grounded, genuinely capable. He looked at Harry with the directness of someone who had heard a great deal about him and had decided the best approach was to form independent opinions. Fleur talks about you, Bill said, the first evening, the two of them briefly alone in the garden while the rest of the Weasley household made the enormous noise that the Weasley household generated in ordinary operation. She talks about you too, Harry said. Bill looked at him with the specific assessment of someone doing an honest calculation. The binding, he said. I know about it. She told you, Harry said. Not surprised. Fleur doesn't do partial information, Bill said. It's one of the things he stopped, reorganized. I'm not going to pretend I have no feelings about it. But I also understand what it is and what it isn't. And I know Fleur. He looked at Harry. She doesn't love small. Whatever she is to you, it's real. And whatever I am to her is also real. These things can both be true. Harry looked at him for a moment. You're a remarkably sensible person, he said. Bill laughed. Don't tell my brothers. They'll be insufferable. Harry grinned. Likewise. They went back inside, and the evening was loud and warm and crowded with Weasleys, and Fleur moved through it with the specific grace of someone who is learning a new social language and is good at languages, and Tonks arrived late from an order meeting and immediately started a conversation with Fred and George that Harry was confident would end with something catching fire, and it was the specific warmth of a chosen family assembled in a kitchen, and Harry stood at the edge of it and felt it. Fully. Sixth year had a quality that fifth year hadn't, a purposeful compression, the sense of things moving toward their end. Dumbledore had begun taking Harry through the Horcrux hunt with the pensieve, and the lessons were the most genuinely interesting interactions Harry had ever had with the old man, stripped of management, straightforwardly educational, the vast accumulated intelligence of a wizard who had made terrible mistakes and understood them fully and was trying to transmit the useful parts of what those mistakes had taught him. Harry went to these lessons with his full attention and his own observations, which sometimes surprised Dumbledore and sometimes didn't, but always, Harry noticed, made the old man lean forward slightly. You've already identified Tom Riddle's psychology, Dumbledore said one evening, in a tone of genuine discovery. I grew up with people who hated what they couldn't control, Harry said. Voldemort is a more powerful version of the same pattern. The cruelty, the need for supremacy, it's what people do when they're afraid they're nothing without the power. He paused. My Uncle Vernon has never killed anyone, but the architecture of it is the same. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. That is both insightful and rather sad, he said. Yes, Harry said. Both. Outside these lessons, Harry maintained the quiet dual existence of sixth year, classes, Quidditch, the specific social weather of a school that knew the war was real now and was handling that knowledge in very individual ways. He watched his year mates and noticed the sorting that happened in genuine crisis, the ones who went inward and the ones who went outward, the ones who found their capacity larger than they'd expected and the ones who found it smaller. He was neither surprised nor judgmental about either result. The DA continued. Formally, it shouldn't have, there was no umbrage to push against and the new data teacher was genuinely competent, but Harry kept it going as an independent structure because the war was real and competence was portable and the DA was not about Hogwarts, it was about being ready. Hermione was running her own branch of it now, essentially, the more theoretical side, and Harry taught the practical while she built the framework around it, and together they were doing something that neither could have done alone. This was, Harry thought, the model, not one person carrying everything but a network of people each carrying their part. He wrote to Tonks about this and she wrote back, that's how Auror teams work when they work well. You're figuring out things people train for years to learn. Also, I need you to know that I am now the youngest person in my division to have led a field operation, and I'm not telling you this to show off, I'm telling you because I want you to know the training we did paid off. The shield work especially. You made me better. He wrote back, you made me better first. She wrote, fine. We made each other better. Don't be sentimental about it. He wrote, too late. Her response took 4 days, which was unusual, and when it came it was brief. I keep thinking about what you said in the atrium. About the binding being an anchor. I think that's the right word. I've been feeling it more lately. Stronger. I don't know if that's because the war is closer or because we are. Probably both. I need you to know that I've thought about this very carefully and I am not confused about what I feel. I just don't know what to do with it yet while you're still at school and I'm still in the field. That's not a complaint. Just, I wanted you to know. Harry sat with that letter for a long time before writing back. I know, he wrote. I've known for a while what I feel, and I'm also not confused about it. The waiting isn't a problem. Some things are worth the time they need. We'll figure out the shape of it when the shape is clearer. That's not me deflecting, it's me saying that the thing itself isn't fragile, and doesn't need forcing, and I trust that. Harry, she didn't write back for 3 days and then, right. Good. Yes. Now please stop being wise, you're 16 and it's annoying. Dumbledore's hand was black and dead from the ring, and Harry had known it since September and had watched the old man manage it with a stoicism that was partly genuine and partly, Harry suspected, performance, not for Harry specifically but for the habit of being Dumbledore, which required a certain quality of unperturbed that apparently extended to one's own death. How long? Harry said, in December, bluntly, because they had built enough honest ground between them by now to warrant the direct question. Dumbledore looked at him. A year, perhaps. Perhaps less. He said it with the equanimity of someone who has made peace with a fact through long familiarity. Snape has extended what time there is. But the curse was designed to be irreversible. And the plan, Harry said. The Horcruxes. We're not going to get through all of them before, no, Dumbledore said. Which is why I need you to understand everything I know. So that when you continue without me, you have everything. When I continue, Harry said. Yes. He sat with the word when and everything it contained. Not if, when. The old man had known for a year that this was the shape of it, had been building Harry toward the moment when Harry would have to carry it alone, and there was something in Harry that wanted to be angry about this and couldn't be, quite, because Dumbledore was also sitting with his own death and saying when I can no longer do this, I need you to do it, and that was honest, actually. That was the most honest thing Dumbledore had ever offered him. There's one more thing, Dumbledore said. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet when something cost him. The fragment of Voldemort's soul inside you. I've been thinking about it, Harry said. There may be a way, Dumbledore said, that does not involve your death. I am not certain. I believe I have reason to believe that the soul fragment can be extracted by the killing curse under specific conditions where the fragment alone is targeted. Where the host survives. Harry looked at him. What conditions? A willingness to die, Dumbledore said. Not the same as dying. The willingness itself, the choice, the acceptance, may function as a release mechanism. The protective magic that kept you alive in 1981 operates on love and sacrifice. If you walk toward death, the fragment goes first, Harry said. I believe so. He sat with this for a very long time. Dumbledore let him. The fire crackled and Fawkes shifted on his perch and the office ticked quietly around them. I'll think about it, Harry said. But I want to find every other option first. Of course, Dumbledore said. And I want to tell Tonks and Fleur. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. I think you should. He told them separately, as he'd told them most things, separately and honestly and with the full information rather than the managed version. He told Fleur in a letter because she was in France with her parents for Christmas, and he told Tonks in person, at Grimmauld Place, on a Wednesday evening, sitting at the kitchen table with tea that was actually hot for once. Tonks listened to all of it. Her face did things that she allowed it to do without managing them, concern, a controlled rage at the scope of what had been asked of him, something that moved through her eyes and settled into the steady focus she used for problems she was committed to solving. When he was done she said, no. Tonks, not no to the plan, she said. No to doing it without exhausting every other option first. No to accepting it as the only path. She was very still, which was not her default, and the stillness had weight. I want to be clear about something. The binding, what you said about the fragment, about the binding keeping it managed, rejecting it, if we strengthen the binding deliberately, if we understand its mechanism better, is there a possibility it can separate the fragment entirely without the killing curse? Fleur's grandmother said the binding amplifies and protects, Harry said. I don't know if it can extract. I'm going to find out, Tonks said. I'm going to tear apart every text in the restricted section of the Ministry Library and every piece of research on ancient magic and soul mechanics until I find another way. She said it with the flat certainty of someone making a declaration rather than a wish. This is not, Harry. I am not going to sit here and treat your death as acceptable collateral for destroying Voldemort. I'm sorry, but I'm not. I know, he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were very dark and very direct. Do you? I know you won't, he said. I'm also not going to treat it as unacceptable if it comes to it. Both things are true. Both things are true, she agreed, after a pause. But I'm going to find the other way. He believed her, which was the thing about Tonks. She didn't make promises she couldn't keep because she'd never developed the habit of promising to manage other people's feelings. She promised the things she would actually do, and then she did them. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and she turned her hand palm up and gripped it, and they sat there with the fire going and the winter dark outside and the weight of it shared between them. When this is done, Harry said. When all of it is done. When all of it is done, Tonks agreed. He didn't finish the sentence and she didn't need him to. February brought the attack on Arthur's son Bill. Greyback came over the walls of Hogwarts with the Death Eaters that Draco Malfoy had let in through the Vanishing Cabinet. Malfoy, who had spent 6 months looking like someone who had taken on a weight that was dissolving him from the inside, who had tried to repair an impossible object because the alternative was his family's destruction, who had pointed a wand at Dumbledore on the top of the astronomy tower and been unable to make the choice that had been required. Harry had been beneath them in his invisible state. He'd watched Malfoy's hand shake. He'd watched the wand lower. He'd watched the old man fall. And then Snape, stepping through the rooftop door with his black robes and his unreadable face and his wand rising. He hadn't understood it then. He'd run, furious, the grief and rage of it chasing him across the grounds and the Death Eaters running ahead of him, and Snape had turned and deflected every spell Harry threw with an ease that was comprehensive and infuriating, and had said, blocked again, pathetic Potter, fight back, I told Dumbledore, and Harry had heard something in it that he couldn't parse until later. Bill was alive. Badly mauled, greyback not fully transformed and therefore not a full werewolf bite and therefore, not a werewolf, or not certainly, or not yet fully understood. He was alive, which was the primary thing. He was in the hospital wing, which Harry went to when the Death Eaters were gone and the castle was roaring with its own aftermath. Fleur was there. She'd come to Hogwarts 3 days prior for reasons Harry had forgotten in the chaos of the night, and she was in the hospital wing beside Bill's bed with her hand in his and her face wearing an expression that was past composure into something more essential, love stripped of performance, entirely itself. Mrs. Weasley said something. Harry arrived in the middle of it, something about Bill's face, about the scarring, about whether Fleur would still, and it had the quality of a thing said from grief rather than cruelty, but the effect was the same. Fleur stood up. She said, in the specific voice she used when she was entirely certain and not interested in being misunderstood, Bill is brave and kind and he fought for your world tonight. His face does not change what he is. Do you think I don't know what he is? She was looking at Mrs. Weasley with the full force of her attention, and she wasn't angry exactly, she was simply beyond the point where other people's doubt of her required management. He is mine. I am his. This does not change. The hospital wing was very quiet. Harry, from the doorway, looked at Fleur, at her entirely unwavering certainty, at the love that was not performing itself for anyone's approval, and he thought about what she'd said in that letter years ago. To be in rooms where I am known rather than displayed. She was known. Right here. Fully. Mrs. Weasley made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a laugh, and she opened her arms, and Fleur went into them, and Bill, from the bed, said, "Thank God for that, I was worried you'd both be at it all night." Harry sat down on a chair near the door and let the warmth in his chest do what it did. Dumbledore died on a Tuesday. The official announcement went through the school on Wednesday morning, and the castle changed quality, not the noise of it, which was already minimal in the aftermath of the attack, but something structural, something that had been steady for longer than any living student could remember. McGonagall took the announcement with her chin up and her eyes fierce and dry, and Harry thought, she has known this was coming and has been preparing herself for it, and the preparation is real, and she is still standing, and that is worth noticing. Harry sat with the grief of it. Not the grief of being managed, of the chess pieces and the plans and the deliberate distance, he'd felt the consequences of those things and they'd cost him. But the grief of a man who had been extraordinary and human and flawed and had spent his last year trying, genuinely, to make things right. The grief of wasted time. The grief of things that had been close to honest by the end. He wrote the obituary in his own head, alone in the dormitory, not for any paper but for himself. He loved magic in the way that very few people love anything, fully, and for itself. He made terrible mistakes with people and understood this at the end. He gave me everything I needed eventually. I wish he'd given it sooner. That felt true. He went to Fleur 2 days after. She was staying at the Burrow for the remainder of the term, helping Molly with practical things, and he found her in the garden in the evening and sat with her in the summer light that was coming long and gold across the lawn. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Working on it," he said. She nodded. She understood working on it. It was a serious answer, not a deflection. "What happens now?" "We go find the rest of the Horcruxes," Harry said. "Dumbledore gave me enough. The locket, the cup, something of Ravenclaw's, something of Gryffindor's possibly, and Nagini." He'd been working through the list for weeks, sorting and cross-referencing with everything Dumbledore had shown him and everything he and Tonks and Fleur had assembled in their own research. "And I need to figure out how to face the last one." She looked at him. "The one inside you." "Tonks has been researching," Harry said. "She hasn't found an alternative yet. But I'm not walking into it without being certain there isn't one." "Good," Fleur said. "Because I found something." He looked at her sharply. My grandmother, she said. I wrote to her in February, after you told me. I told her everything, the fragment, the binding, the protective property, the killing curse solution Dumbledore had theorized. She paused. She wrote back last week. She said the binding has a property she didn't explain to me initially because she wanted to be certain before she said it. Her eyes were very direct. The binding, when it reaches full resonance, when the connection is complete rather than developing, creates what she calls a refuge. A protected space within the self. She said a soul fragment held in a refuge is not part of the host. It's held separately, the way a foreign object is held in tissue rather than integrated into it. Harry was very still. Which means, Fleur said carefully, that if the refuge is fully formed when the killing curse finds the fragment may be separated and destroyed without the curse reaching further. She paused. She was not certain. She said this has not been done before. She said the theory is sound but the practice has no precedent. What does fully formed mean? Harry said. She was not specific, Fleur said, with the expression of someone who finds this inadequate. She never is, Harry said. No, Fleur agreed. Then, quietly, but she said, and I want to be precise about this because she was precise, she said the refuge forms through the binding reaching its full nature. Not just connection. Not just protection. She said through, she took a breath, through love, Harry. Through it being fully what it is and knowing itself completely. The garden was warm and still. Somewhere in the house Molly was making something that smelled of herbs and bread, and the twins' old ghoul was doing something in the attic, and the summer evening was going gold into orange. So we need the binding to be complete, Harry said. Yes, Fleur said. Which requires time, Harry said. Or, not time exactly. Honesty. Acknowledgement. He looked at her, at the grey-blue eyes that were entirely present, entirely his, the same eyes that had steadied a 7-year-old in a Surrey market and been the first thing that started all of this. I love you, he said. The first time he'd said it in plain language rather than the accumulated weight of years of letters and the warmth that they both knew was there. I have loved you since you looked at me with those eyes like you were working out a very important problem and I was the problem. She laughed, short and startled and real. I love you too, she said. Since a market in Guildford when I caught a small boy falling and felt the world rearrange itself. A pause. I should tell you that Bill knows I am saying this. We have talked. He is, a remarkably sensible person, Harry said. Her mouth curved. Yes. Exactly that. They sat in the summer garden and the gold light went slowly to orange, and the warmth in his chest was the most present it had ever been, not the pilot light of years, not the steady pulse of the connection maintaining itself, but something fuller, the difference between embers and a fire that has been properly lit. He found Tonks the next morning. She was in the Auror training yard at the ministry, finishing a session, and she saw him come through the gate and she knew, he could see it in her face the moment she saw his. She knew from his expression that something had changed, that something had been said, that the accounting was different now. He told her what Fleur had said. The refuge. The full resonance. What it required. She was quiet for a long time, her wand loose in her hand, the training yard empty around them. I know what I feel, she said, echoing her letter of months ago. I know, he said. And I know we've been waiting, she said. And I know the reason for the waiting was real. You were 15 and then 16 and I was, the gap was what it was and we were both honest about it. She looked at him. Her eyes were dark and completely clear. The gap is smaller now. You're going to be 17 in July. Yes, Harry said. And there is apparently a cosmological reason, separate from the obvious emotional reason, to close it. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was warm and dry and entirely itself. This is the least romantic thing I have ever heard in my life and it's also completely our situation. Harry laughed. Genuinely, fully, the laugh that came from somewhere real rather than somewhere performing. Yes, he said. I love you, Tonks said. I have been in love with you since approximately the year I watched you face a dragon and then compliment it. She said it in the same voice she said facts, clear, unhesitating, committed. And I have been scrupulously appropriate about it, and I am ready to be somewhat less appropriate about it now. He crossed the training yard and she met him halfway, and he took both her hands in his and they stood there, and the warmth in his chest was enormous and steady and complete, the fire that had been three separate things for 7 years turning into one large thing that was also still three separate things, the way a chord is three notes that are also one sound. When this is done, he said. When this is done, she agreed. We figure out what it looks like. Then, with the Tonks-specific combination of warmth and irreverence, though for the record I want it known I've been waiting 8 years, and I expect the figuring out to take considerably less time than that. Noted, Harry said, and squeezed her hands. The morning was bright and the war was ahead of them and the year was going to cost everything it was going to cost, and Harry held both truths, the weight of it and the warmth of it, in the same place in his chest, which was the place that had been growing toward this since a Saturday in Surrey when the world had looked at a 7-year-old boy carrying shopping bags and decided he was owed something enormous. He was going to carry it forward. All of it. He was ready. Chapter 6. What ancient magic knew the Horcrux hunt lasted 7 months and felt like 7 years and also like 7 minutes, depending on which part of it you were in. Harry had spent the summer building the plan rather than reacting to the absence of one, which was the fundamental difference between this version of the hunt and any version where he'd gone in with less. He had the full list. He had the research. He had Hermione's organizational mind and Ron's instinctive strategic sense and the combined intelligence of two people who had been preparing alongside him since he was 7 years old. They went in September, after the wedding, after the ministry fell to Voldemort, with the specific efficiency of an institution whose leadership had already been compromised from the inside. Thickness walking into the minister's office with pious Thickness' face and Voldemort's intentions, and the world they'd known shifting on its axis again. The wedding was Bill and Fleur's, and it was the most beautiful thing Harry had seen in a year that had not been generous with beautiful things. The Burrow Garden in July light, Fleur in white that was the same color as her hair, the specific expression on Bill's face when he saw her come down the makeshift aisle. Harry sat beside Tonks in the third row and felt the warmth steady in his chest and thought, this is what it's for. This is what the fighting is for. Not abstractions. This. Death Eaters came before the reception finished, which was the war's tendency, finding the moments that mattered and arriving in them. Harry and Ron and Hermione were in the street and then in a cafe and then underground in the most literal sense, which was how the hunt began. The locket was first. The Ministry of Magic under Voldemort's control was a specific kind of horror, the banners, the statue, the registration of Muggleborns, the systematic rewriting of history happening in real time. Harry walked into it polyjuiced and calm and thought about what institutions look like when the people inside them have been replaced by the thing they were meant to resist. He thought about Umbridge, who was there, who was thriving in exactly the way that people with her specific psychology thrive when authority removes its conscience. He got the locket. He got it by walking through the ministry with the certainty of someone who belongs there, which was a quality he'd been cultivating for years, and Hermione got them out when things went sideways with the calm improvisational brilliance that was her particular gift, and Ron held the rear with the steady reliable courage that people always underestimated in him because it came without fanfare. They destroyed it in November, in a forest in the Scottish Highlands, and Tonks had sent word through Patronus about the sword, the real sword, the one that would work on Horcruxes, and Harry had gone into the frozen pool for it without telling Ron and Hermione because it needed doing and there wasn't time for discussion, and the locket's fragment had used the opening to fill the water with darkness and cold. He'd come up. Because the anchor held. Even in cold water with a Horcrux actively trying to drown him, the warmth was there, unextinguishable, and the darkness that the fragment threw against it broke like water on stone. Ron destroyed it. The sword rising and falling and the terrible screaming of a piece of Voldemort's soul meeting something it couldn't absorb or corrupt, and then silence, and the three of them standing in the cold forest with their breath steaming, and something lighter in the air. 1. The cup was at Gringotts, which was the second most audacious thing they did, after the forest walk at the end. Griphook drove a harder bargain than anyone else they'd negotiated with, and Harry gave him what he asked for, genuinely, without the internal reservation that would have made it dishonest, because he understood that the goblins had their own legitimate grievances with the wizarding world's history, and Griphook was not wrong about any of the things he said about it. He was wrong about Harry's intentions, but that was Griphook's prerogative. The vault. The clankers and the cart and the waterfall and the vault door opening and the false Horcrux copies multiplying under their touch, Harry moved through it with single-minded focus, feeling for the real cup with the connection he'd developed over 7 months of learning how Voldemort's objects felt from the inside, the specific register of something that had been part of a fractured soul for decades. He found it. He grabbed it. He burned his hand on the multiplying gold and didn't stop. Getting out involved a dragon, which was the kind of sentence that only made sense in a life like his. He rode it out over London on a Thursday morning and felt it bank and turn over the Thames, and he looked at the city below him, at the ordinary enormous beautiful city going about its Wednesday business, and thought, this is what's at stake. All of this. The unremarkable fact of it continuing. 2. Ravenclaw's diadem was at Hogwarts, which meant going back, which meant the battle. They came in through the Room of Requirement in May, 6 months after leaving, and the castle received them with the quality of a place that has been held under occupation and is remembering what it used to be. The DA was there, older, harder, leaner, Neville at the center of it with the quiet authority of someone who has been holding a resistance together through a year of systematic cruelty and has emerged from it not smaller but larger. Harry looked at Neville in the Room of Requirement and thought about a round-faced boy who hadn't known his own strength, and the 11-year-old who told him again the first time he cast something correctly. You've been busy, Harry said. You taught us well, Neville said. You did the teaching, Harry said. I just showed you what you already had. Neville looked at him with the expression of someone receiving a truth they've been working toward for years. Yeah, he said. I think that's right. The battle began at midnight. Harry had the diadem destroyed before the main battle broke, in the Room of Requirement that Crabbe set on fire in the specific panicked cruelty of someone who has been given power and no wisdom to contain it, and the fire ate Crabbe and the diadem and the stored secrets of 7 centuries of Hogwarts students, and Harry and Ron and Hermione rode broomsticks through the flames and came out into a castle at war. The courtyard was chaos, spells crossing in every direction, the organized rhythm of trained fighters and the desperate improvisation of people who were making do with what they had, which was considerable because Harry had spent 2 years building what they had. The DA fought with the specific quality of people who knew their skills, and the Order fought with the quality of people who had been waiting for this moment for years, and Tonks was somewhere in the middle of all of it, and Fleur, and Bill, and the Weasleys in their complete and formidable entirety. Harry moved through the battle the way he moved through all fights now, present, fast, unfrightened, making decisions at the speed the situation required without agonizing over the making. He stunned a Death Eater entering through the main gate, shielded McGonagall from a curse aimed at her back, stopped briefly to get Lavender Brown clear of something she wasn't going to survive without help. He found Tonks near the entrance to the Great Hall. She was dueling 2 Death Eaters simultaneously with the fluid efficiency of someone who had been doing this since she was 17 years old and had never stopped training, and she was also clearly watching the wider battle, her aura instincts reading it like a map, and when Harry arrived at her shoulder she incorporated him without a word, their rhythms falling into the pattern they'd built in all those training yard sessions, covering angles, complementing rather than duplicating. They cleared the doorway in 40 seconds. Nagini, Harry said. I know, she said. Ron and Hermione? On it. He'd sent Ron and Hermione for the snake when the intelligence came through the Order's network. Nagini needed to die before Voldemort could die, that was the logic. I need to find Voldemort. She looked at him. In the middle of a battle, with spells crossing 20 meters away and the castle shaking from something large happening in the East Wing, she looked at him with the full specific weight of everything they were to each other, and her eyes said, I know what you're about to do." "The forest," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "Harry, the refuge," he said. "I can feel it. It's complete." And it was. The warmth in his chest was different now, had been different since July, since the 2 conversations in the Borough Garden and the training yard, since the binding had been acknowledged in the full honest language it had always deserved. It was not the pilot light of years or the steady pulse of development. It was complete. The right word. Something that knew its own shape. I felt the fragment shift. Something changed when, it's different in there. Separate. She stared at him. He could see her calculating, the aura mind running the analysis, the theory Fleur's grandmother had given them and the months of research she'd done trying to find an alternative and the evidence of what he was describing now. "The refuge is formed," she said. "I believe so." "If you're wrong, I'm not," he said. Not arrogance. The same flat certainty he used for observable facts. "I know my own interior. I have been paying attention to it for 10 years. She grabbed him by the collar of his robes and kissed him, fast and fierce and entirely real, and then let go and said, "Come back," and turned back to the battle with her wand rising, and Harry went. He found Fleur in the courtyard. She was standing over a stunned Death Eater with a cut on her cheek and her hair escaping its braid and the expression she wore when she had done something difficult and found it adequate. "Harry," she said, and she looked at him the same way Tonks had, the full weight of knowing what he was about to do. "I need to go to the forest," he said. "I know." She stepped toward him. Put both hands on his face the way she had in the tournament arena, years ago, careful and deliberate. Her gray-blue eyes were very close. "The fragment, you can feel it?" "Separate," he said. "The way you said. Held in tissue, not integrated." Something moved through her expression, relief and fear and the specific expression of someone whose theory has been confirmed in the worst possible timing. "Then it will work," she said. "I believe it will," he said. "Harry." She pulled his forehead down to hers, the lightest contact, and he felt the warmth surge so strongly it was nearly audible, the binding at its full resonance, both of them present to it, the ancient deep thing that had started in a Surrey market burning clear and complete. "You are coming back," she said. Not a question. Not a request. A statement of fact made in the tone of someone who has decided this is true and is committing to the decision. "Yes," he said, and meant it not as comfort but as real intention, the fullest version of what he knew. She let go. He went. The forbidden forest was dark and still in the way that wild places are still during battles, the animals gone deep, the trees absorbing the distant sounds of the castle into their silence, the dark holding what the dark always holds. Harry walked into it with his hands loose at his sides and his wand in his pocket and the snitch from first year in his palm. "I open at the close." He'd had 7 months to think about this moment and he'd thought about it with the same honest attention he brought to everything, and what he'd concluded was that dying and being willing to die were 2 different things, and the willingness was the requirement, not the outcome. He pressed the snitch to his lips and said, "I am about to die," and the resurrection stone fell into his hand and the stone turned and his parents came, and Sirius, and Remus who had died 2 hours ago in the east wing of the castle and whose absence had landed on Harry like something physical when the Patronus message came through. He looked at them. At his mother's eyes that were his own eyes. At his father's hair that was his own hair. At Sirius, grinning, the real grin, the one from Christmas. At Remus with his lined and careful face, finally at peace with all the things it had carried. "Is it quick?" he said to his mother. "Quicker than falling asleep," she said. He nodded. He was not afraid. He was fully present, fully himself, the self that had been built through 10 years of being treated as a person by people who understood that persons were the point, and he was going to carry all of it into the moment the killing curse found him. He walked into the clearing. Voldemort was there with his Death Eaters in a ring, and the great snake Nagini was at his side, but Harry had felt it through the forest, felt it through the connection that had been the most reliable intelligence source he'd had all year. Nagini was dead. Ron and Hermione had done it. The last Horcrux outside himself was gone. Voldemort looked at him. Harry looked back. "You came," Voldemort said, with the quality of something that thinks it has won. "Yes," Harry said. "I did." He didn't reach for his wand. He stood in the clearing with his hands at his sides and he felt the fragment inside him, the piece of broken soul that had lived in him since he was 1 year old, that the binding had held in its refuge like a foreign object held in tissue, separate and contained. He felt it clearly. He knew its location and its nature and its separateness. "Come on then," he thought. Not to Voldemort. To the fragment. "This ends now." The curse came green and immediate and absolute. What happened next happened in a register that Harry experienced not as sensation but as knowledge, the knowledge of something that has been true since before language and doesn't need language now. The killing curse found the fragment in its refuge. Found it separate, encapsulated, held by the binding in the clear space between Harry and what wasn't Harry. The curse did what curses do, it destroyed what it found. The fragment went. The warmth in his chest flared so bright and total that Harry thought, oh. This is what it was for. Not just protection. This is the name of it. And then nothing. He was somewhere white and clean and quiet, and Dumbledore was there, older and younger than Harry had ever seen him simultaneously, sitting across from Harry with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting and is glad the waiting is done. "Is this real?" Harry said. "Your feelings and experiences are real," Dumbledore said. "Shall we say that?" "Good enough," Harry said. He looked around. "The fragment is gone." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I'm not." "No," Dumbledore said, and the warmth in his voice, underneath the formal precision, the real warmth, was something Harry hadn't heard from him often enough in life and was glad to hear now. "No. The binding held. Exactly as theorized. Exactly as you believed it would." Harry sat with this. "Voldemort. Still alive," Dumbledore said. "The snake is dead. The Horcruxes are all destroyed. There is one thing remaining." "Yes," Harry said. "It is your choice," Dumbledore said. "Only and entirely your choice." Harry thought about the warmth, which was present even here, which made him think it had never been about where he was but about what he was. He thought about Tonks in the doorway with her wand rising, "Come back." He thought about Fleur's forehead against his, the lightest contact, the full weight of everything in it. He thought about Ron and Hermione and Neville and the castle full of people who had chosen to stand in it and fight. "I'm going back," he said. "I know," Dumbledore said, with something that was not quite a smile and contained all the warmth of one. "I am very glad, Harry. Of all of it. In the end." "In the end," Harry agreed. He woke to the forest floor under his back and Narcissa Malfoy's face above him, and he lay still, because the situation required it, and he thought with absolute clarity about what needed to happen next and how to make it happen. The walk back to Hogwarts in Hagrid's arms while Voldemort declared victory was the most particular kind of difficult thing Harry had ever done, not physically, not because of the pain, but because every instinct he had was operational and every one of them required suppression for 30 more minutes. He heard the sounds of people learning that he was dead. He heard Voldemort's triumphant voice bouncing off the castle walls. He heard the answering sound from inside Hogwarts that was grief and fury, which were the same sound sometimes. He heard Neville's voice above the crowd. And he heard what Neville said, and he thought, 9 years ago a round-faced boy didn't know his own strength, and here is what that strength looks like now. Then the snake and the sword and chaos erupting around him, and Harry hit the ground running. He caught Voldemort's eye and pulled off the invisibility cloak and let the eye contact land, let Voldemort see him fully alive, fully himself, the fragment gone and the binding complete and nothing in Harry that could be used as a handle anymore, and he called out across the length of the great hall with the carrying voice he developed over years of teaching the Da, Expelliarmus, and caught the Elder Wand when it came to him. Voldemort's killing curse rebounded from the disarming charm and found its caster, which was the oldest story in Harry's life coming to its only possible conclusion. The greatest dark wizard in a century died in the Great Hall of Hogwarts on a Thursday morning in May, surrounded by the wreckage of his final battle, because a 14-year-old had once walked into a forest and been willing to die, and a 7-year-old had once fallen in a market and 2 people had steadied him, and the world had recognized something in all 3 of them and made a promise about it in the oldest language available. The silence afterward was enormous. Then the great hall erupted, and Harry stood in the middle of it and let it happen around him, let the noise and the grief and the joy and the relief all occupy the same space because they all had equal right to it, and he looked through the crowd for the faces he needed. Ron was there, Hermione pressed against his chest, his arm around her, both of them looking at Harry with the specific expression of people who have crossed something terrible together and are standing on the other side taking stock. Harry crossed to them and they pulled him in and nobody said anything useful for a long time, which was the correct response. McGonagall, coming through the crowd with her robes singed and her expression doing the specific thing it did when she was deeply moved and had decided to express it formally, "Well done, Mr. Potter." She said it looking directly at him, and the weight in it was 10 years of watching a child grow into someone remarkable, and he felt it properly and it mattered. Kingsley moved through the room with the quiet authority of the man who was already, by virtue of simply being the most stable person present, becoming what the ministry needed to become, and the transition of power was happening as naturally as weather, and Harry noted this and thought, good. That's the right shape. Neville, his robes destroyed and his face bloodied, came to stand beside Harry and didn't say anything at all, and Harry gripped his shoulder once and Neville gripped back, and that was the whole of it. He found Tonks in the entrance hall. She had a gash on her left arm that a healer had already treated and a healer's wrap around her ribs and her hair was the natural brown of not choosing anything, and she looked at him across the length of the entrance hall with the expression of someone checking that a fact is true. He crossed to her and she met him in the middle and he held on, properly, both arms, and she held back with the same completeness, and neither of them said anything for a long time because the holding was the sentence. When they separated, she looked at his face. The fragment. Gone, he said. Her eyes closed briefly. One breath. Then they opened and she was present again, fully, the analytical part of her already moving. The binding. Complete, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The dust of the battle settling around them. The sounds of the great hall a room away. The morning light coming through the castle's broken windows. How do you feel? It was a Tonks question, not are you all right, not the reflexive checking, but the actual question, the one that required a real answer. He thought about it honestly. He felt the warmth, which was different now, not the steady pilot light or the building resonance but something full and present and entirely itself, the binding complete in the way a chord is complete when all the notes are sounding. He felt the absence of the fragment, which was not a loss but a clarification, like a room with a piece of furniture removed that had never been right for the space, the room being more itself without it. He felt the grief, still there, Sirius and Remus and the 50-odd people who had died in this castle tonight. He felt the specific tiredness of someone who has been carrying something enormous for a very long time and has just set it down. Lighter, he said. And, whole. Actually whole, not just managing. She nodded slowly, taking this in. Yeah, she said. Yeah, that sounds right. Tonks, he said. I want to figure out the shape of it. What I said in the training yard. I want to start doing that. He looked at her directly, with the full honest attention he brought to things that mattered. Not someday. Soon. She looked at him. Her eyes were dark and clear and entirely decided. Yeah, she said. Me too. He found Fleur in the courtyard. The morning was bright, the May sun already past the castle's roofline and hitting the stone with the quality of something new. Fleur was sitting on the low wall by the fountain, which was damaged but still running, her hair down and her wedding robes, still worn from yesterday, catching the morning light. She was looking at the damage to the courtyard with the specific expression of someone who is making an assessment of what will need to be repaired and how. She looked up when he came. "Harry," she said. Then, looking at his face, "It worked." "It worked," he said. She exhaled, not dramatic, just the release of something that had been held very tightly. The fragment. Gone. No collateral. Exactly as theorized. He sat on the wall beside her. "Your grandmother was right." "She usually is," Fleur said, with the dry tone she used for things that were irritating and also true. "It is insufferable." "I'll write and thank her," Harry said. "She'll like that," Fleur said. "She'll also have 17 follow-up questions about the mechanism and will want a full account of the physiological experience." A pause. "I'll warn her it might take some time." "Tell her I'll answer them all," Harry said. "Eventually." He looked at the courtyard, at the castle above it, at the specific quality of the morning light on stone that had stood for 1,000 years and intended to stand for 1,000 more. "We're going to have time, you know. All three of us. Actual time. To figure out what it looks like." "Yes," Fleur said. She turned to look at him, and her gray-blue eyes had the quality he'd noticed since they were 7 and 16 respectively, the full attention, the working out, the precise and genuine presence. "I know what I want it to look like. Some of it." "Tell me," he said. "Work that matters," she said. "Spell research, or the ministry, or both, I haven't decided, but work that actually builds something rather than maintaining the same broken structure. England, for now. Bill and I have a house in Devon, near the sea." She looked at him. "I want you to know where it is. I want you to know you can come when you need to, and when you don't need to but want to. Both are valid reasons." "Both are valid reasons," Harry agreed. She reached out and took his hand, the same hand she'd steadied in a Surrey market 19 years of her life and 10 years of his ago, and she held it and they sat together in the morning light of a world that was different today than it had been yesterday. "There is one thing I want to say," she said. "While we are both here and the morning is quiet and we are not in the middle of anything urgent." She looked at him directly. "I do not know exactly what the three of us are. The binding does not have a name in any legal or social framework that exists. People will have opinions about it. People will try to categorize it, and failing that they will try to dismiss it or judge it." Her chin was up, her voice entirely level. "I do not care about any of those people's opinions. I know what this is. I have always known. I want you to know that I am going to continue not caring, indefinitely." Harry looked at her. He thought about the 16-year-old who had said "I refuse to be managed," who had carried that refusal through 4 years of Beau's batons and 1 year of Triwizard and the whole of a war. "I know," he said. "I've always known you would." She squeezed his hand once. "Good." The days after the battle had the quality of all aftermath, the enormous work of accounting for what had happened, the grief to move through, the structures to rebuild. Harry stayed at Hogwarts through the first week of it, helping where he could, sleeping in his old dormitory on the bed that was too short for him now, writing letters to Tonks in the evenings that were longer and more honest than they'd ever needed to be coded. Kingsley asked him, on the 4th day, whether he intended to become an Auror. He thought about it seriously, which Kingsley appreciated. Harry could see the appreciation of the actual consideration rather than the reflexive response. "I want to," he said. "But I want to finish my education first. Properly. Come back for 8th year, sit my newts, do it right." He paused. "And I want Hermione and Ron to have the year too. We missed one. I want to give it back." Kingsley nodded. "When you're ready, the door is open." "I know," Harry said. "Thank you, Kingsley." He used the first name deliberately, which Kingsley received without comment but with the slight adjustment of expression that meant he'd noticed and considered it appropriate. There is something else, Kingsley said. Pettigrew. In custody since the tournament. He was less cooperative than we'd hoped during the war. But now that it's over, his willingness to talk is somewhat more developed. He'll give you Voldemort's network, Harry said. Everyone who served. The full web. He thought about the small man in the ministry's holding cell, who had been given 7 years to consider his choices. Let him testify. Give him whatever he needs to give you the full picture. The point isn't punishing Pettigrew. The point is dismantling what Voldemort built. Kingsley looked at him steadily. Some people will have views on that. Some people are allowed to have views, Harry said. I'm telling you what I think is strategically correct. The rest is your decision. Noted, Kingsley said, in the tone of someone who has made a note and intends to act on it. The summer was long and warm, and for the first time in Harry's life felt like something a summer was supposed to feel like, not a waiting period, not an endurance, but actual time that was his to occupy. He spent the first week at the Burrow, which was the right place to be for the particular grief of the Weasley family, and he was present for all of it in the way that being present requires, not fixing, not managing, just there, reliably, in the kitchen and the garden and at the table and wherever the family needed to be, somewhere that was full rather than empty. George was the hardest part. George without Fred was a specific kind of loss that had no framework, because Fred and George had been so completely themselves as a pair that the half remaining was both entirely Fred and entirely himself and entirely neither, and Harry found no good words for any of it and stopped trying to find them and just stayed. He went to Devon in July. The house Bill and Fleur had was white-walled and salt-aired and sat on a cliff above a cove that turned jade green in the afternoon light, and Fleur met him at the gate with Seve on her shoulder and the specific expression of someone who has been looking forward to a thing and is allowing themselves to show it. They had 3 days. They walked the cliff paths and Fleur told him about the spell research she'd been reading toward, and Harry talked about the coming year at Hogwarts, what he wanted from it beyond the newts, what he was thinking about after. They cooked badly and ate it anyway and sat on the cliff edge in the evening with the sea below them making its endless sound. On the second evening, Fleur said, "Are you happy?" He thought about it fully. He thought about Sirius and Remus and the weight of the losses, which were real and would remain real, things you carried rather than put down. He thought about the warmth in his chest, which had been the most constant fact of his life since he was 7. He thought about Tonks's letter that morning, from London, which had opened, "I have been given a desk at the ministry and I am doing absolutely nothing with it and it is wonderful." He thought about the Weasleys, and McGonagall, and Neville, and Hermione's face when she'd gotten on the Hogwarts Express last September knowing she was going back. He thought about the sea below the cliff and the warmth of the July evening and Fleur beside him with her hair doing what it did in sea wind. "Yes," he said. "Complicated. But yes." "Good," she said. "Complicated is honest. Uncomplicated is either very lucky or very young." "Or both," Harry said. "Or both," she agreed. He turned 17 on the 31st of July. Tonks came to the Burrow in the morning with a cake that was lopsided on one side and clearly not her fault because she'd outsourced the baking to someone who had more ambition than skill, and she set it on the kitchen table and said, "Happy birthday," and Harry looked at her bright dark eyes and her current hair which was its natural brown because she'd been not choosing things since the battle and hadn't quite decided to start again, and he thought, here we are. Here is the other side of everything. He was 17. She was 24. The gap that had been the right thing to honor for the right reasons had always been going to close eventually, and this was eventually. He crossed the kitchen and kissed her properly, for the first time that wasn't farewell in a battle, and she kissed him back with the same committed immediacy she brought to all decisions she'd already made, and when they broke apart she looked at him with the warm and slightly exasperated expression she'd been developing since a market car park when she was 17 and he was 7. "About time," she said. "I was being appropriately patient," he said. "You were," she said. "I'm choosing not to be anymore." "Excellent decision," he said. She grinned, fully, brightly, the real one, the one that had been the first thing he'd trusted about her. "Now we're going to eat this terrible cake and you're going to tell me what you want from the next year, and I'm going to tell you what I'm doing about my desk at the ministry, and then we're going to figure out the shape of it." "The shape of it," Harry said. "Us," she said simply. "All three of us, whatever that looks like, which is going to be something that doesn't have a name in any framework that currently exists, and I am fully fine with that." She pointed at the cake. "Sit down." He sat down. She cut the cake. It was genuinely terrible. He ate 2 pieces. The ancient magic had never been complicated. That was the thing about old things, they didn't require complexity because they predated the systems that generated complexity. They simply were. They recognized what they recognized and they held what they held and they promised what they promised and the promise was true. A boy of 7 in a Surrey market, sharp-eyed and patient and already something different from what the world expected him to be. A girl of 16 whose full attention had turned on him like sunlight and found something worth finding. A girl of 17 whose laugh had been genuine and whose warning had been the truest thing anyone had said to him for years. The world had looked at all 3 of them in the same morning and said, yes. These ones. Here is what this boy is owed, and here is what these girls are owed, and the owing runs in all directions at once. Not a contract. Not a cage. Not a compulsion or a system or a plan. Something older and quieter and more certain than all of those things, a recognition of what was real. The kind of thing you couldn't argue with or manage or redirect, the kind that simply continued to be true regardless of what institutions or individuals tried to make of it. Harry Potter had grown into it honestly. He had not hidden it or apologized for it or let anyone else define its terms. He had trusted the warmth and honored what it told him and done the work the connection required, which was simply the work of being fully himself in the direction of people who were fully themselves, which was the hardest work there is and the only kind worth doing. He was 17. He was going back to Hogwarts in September. He was going to become an Auror and build something real with it. He had 2 people who knew him completely and chose him anyway, and a castle full of people who trusted him, and a world that was different now, imperfect and complicated and in need of serious rebuilding, which was all the better because rebuilding was something he was good at. He'd been building since he was 7. The morning light came through the Burrows' kitchen windows in its long August way, falling across the terrible cake and the tea and Tonks's expression across the table and the sound of the household waking up around them, and the warmth in Harry's chest burned clear and complete and entirely its own, not a background hum anymore but a full and open sound, the chord struck and resonating, the 3 notes that were also 1 note that was also 3, filling the space it had always been meant to fill. He was home. Not a house. Not a building. Not a place you were assigned. The kind you chose. The kind that chose you back. The kind that had been choosing you since before you had the language for choosing, since the oldest magic in the world looked at something true and said, yes. This is what matters. This is what holds. This was what held.